Robb Stark stood alone in the solar, the light of the dying sun staining the stone walls of Riverrun in deep shades of orange and crimson. The warmth of the evening glow did little to chase away the chill that had settled in his veins since he first discovered the truth. Jon Snow was not his half-brother but rather the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Ned Stark, in all his honor, had carried the secret to his grave, and now that burden had shifted onto Robb's shoulders. The letter that had come into his possession told the tale without ambiguity, whisper-thin but damning details tucked away in a bundle of Ned's private writings, a confession of sorts that explained more than it asked forgiveness for. Robb felt the weight of it settling heavily on his chest. Until this moment, all he had known was that he was the king in the north, declared by his bannermen after the brutal execution of his father. Until this moment, he had believed himself the rightful heir to Winterfell, the face of stark justice and retribution in a broken realm. Yet if the words in that letter were true and deep in his heart he had no doubt that they changed everything. Jon was not merely a Northman with no surname to claim. Jon, in the eyes of the Seven Kingdoms, had a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than any Baratheon, Lannister, or Targaryen pretender still drawing breath. There had been shock at first, a sense of betrayal that Ned Stark, the man Robb had adored and emulated, would keep such a secret from him. He had raged inside, wanting to take the letter, tear it into scraps, and feed it to a hearth fire. He had told no one, not even his mother. But day by day, as the war raged on and the nights seemed to grow ever darker, he found himself thinking about Jon, about how his brother, no, his cousin, had grown up with them at Winterfell, always on the fringes, yet always steadfast and loyal. There was an ache in Robb's chest when he considered all the pain Jon must have felt over the years, wrongly believing himself to be unwanted by the father who had, in truth, protected him with the greatest sacrifice, his honor. How could he ignore this revelation when it might change the course of the war? Of all the people in Westeros, Jon might have been the only one who did not covet power for its own sake. Jon valued honor, compassion, and loyalty, virtues Ned Stark had instilled in him under the guise of paternal discipline. What if, Robb asked himself over and over, this war could end under the leadership of someone truly just? If the Iron Throne belonged to Jon by blood, then perhaps the realm would rally behind a Targaryen Stark heir who would strive to heal the wounds inflicted by years of Lannister scheming, Baratheon aggression, and Greyjoy opportunism. The duties of the day weighed heavily on Robb as he strode from the solar to the Great Hall where his bannermen were gathering. He had quietly summoned the Great Jon, Ser Edmure Tully, Roose Bolton, and a handful of the lords who still followed him. Their loyalty had always been to House Stark, but would they remain loyal if he relinquished his claim in favor of another? Would they even believe him? He remembered how the Great Jon had roared with approval when he was proclaimed king in the north. The man was not subtle, he was fierce in his devotion to the Stark cause. Would the same ferocity be directed at a new candidate for leadership, one who had never asked for the throne in the first place? As he entered the hall, he noted the array of solemn faces. They were tired. The war against the Lannisters had taken its toll. Fewer men filled the seats now. Some had perished on the field, others deserted after the fall of Winterfell to the Ironborn. Food was beginning to run scarce, tensions were high, and rumors traveled faster than ravens. Catelyn Stark stood near the dais, her eyes lined with worry. She had been asking him endlessly about the letter from his father, but he had given her only vague answers. He needed time to think, time to plan, before he revealed what Ned had truly left behind. And so he walked past his mother without meeting her gaze, took his seat, and signaled for silence. "My lords," he began, feeling the echo of his own voice in the hall, "I have called you here not to speak of new battles but of new truths. We have spilled enough blood, but I fear more blood shall be spilled unless we can find another path." He paused to steady himself. His eyes flickered to his mother, who tilted her head, concerned, but said nothing. The Great Jon scratched at his beard, frowning. Bolton stood with an eerie stillness, a slight curl to his lips as if anticipating something maliciously intriguing. Robb pressed on. "You all know the cause that brought us here, justice for my father, Eddard Stark, and the freedom of the North from tyranny. Yet I have come into knowledge that changes the shape of our fight. My father left behind a truth that he kept from everyone, one that may alter the course of this war. It concerns my half-brother, Jon Snow." Catelyn's lips parted in alarm. She might have imagined any number of revelations, but surely not this. The Great Jon let out a low growl as if the very mention of Jon's name displeased him. Roose Bolton narrowed his eyes, and the rest remained as still as tombstones. Robb continued, "Jon Snow is not the bastard son of Ned Stark. He is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. My father shielded him from the wrath of King Robert, and for that reason John was raised as a Snow so that none might suspect his parentage." He paused, letting the enormity of the revelation sink in. If this is true, and I have every reason to believe it is, then he has a claim to the Iron Throne that might eclipse all other pretenders. A wave of disbelief crashed through the hall. Voices rose in alarmed confusion. The great John slammed a meaty fist onto the table, making goblets shake and wine slosh over the edges. Edmure Tully stood up, eyes wide, hands trembling. Caitlyn's face went deathly pale, and she brought her hand to her chest as if to contain her heart. Robb raised his arms to quell the outrage, but their shock was only natural. When the voices died down, Roose Bolton's soft, measured tone cut through the tension like a scalpel. "Your Grace, these are extraordinary claims. You say Lord Eddard Stark wrote this in a letter? May we see it?" Robb had expected that. Slowly, he took out the parchment, worn, sealed with the dire wolf of House Stark, and unbroken until he had read it. He handed it to Bolton in front of all. "Read, my lord, but guard your voice. This is dangerous knowledge, and if it spreads, well, you all know how the Lannisters respond to threats." Bolton's pale eyes glided across the words. Others craned their necks, trying to glean a snippet of the text. Finally, Bolton passed the letter in silence to the Great John, who read it. The Great John snorted in disbelief at first, then read again more carefully. He passed it on. Slowly, the circle of lords came to terms with this secret. Murmurs filled the hall. Caitlyn looked stricken. "All my life, I believed Ned had dishonored me with that boy." Her voice came out shaky. All that time, he was protecting Lyanna's son, Rhaegar's son. She almost choked on Rhaegar's name. She remembered the rebellion, the bloodshed. The entire North had rallied behind Robert Baratheon against the Targaryens, and Eddard Stark had brought her father and brother's bones home, broken by the Mad King's cruelty. She had lost so much to the Targaryen name, and now that name had been hidden in her own household, nurtured by her own husband. But Robb saw something shift in her eyes, an understanding. Ned Stark, honorable as he was, would never have betrayed her. The revelation was a dual blow and a strange bomb. Then, "Jon is not Ned's son," she whispered. "No," Robb confirmed. "He is Rhaegar's, a Targaryen by half and a Stark by half. My father believed his life was in danger should Robert Baratheon discover the truth. King Robert would never have allowed a Targaryen heir to live." Silence settled like a shroud upon them. Even the Great John looked subdued for a moment, as if the breath had been knocked from his lungs. Then he spoke. "This is madness. If the boy is a Targaryen, he's our enemy. We crowned you, Robb Stark, as king in the north. We wanted no more kneeling to southern kings. Are we now to kneel to this Snow, this Targaryen?" Robb's jaw tightened. He knew this would be hard. "I have not said we kneel, but let us consider the realm and the cost of continuing this war. The Lannisters will not yield. The Tyrells will not betray them. And in the north we have dire foes. We are starved for peace or for an alliance that will help us protect our own. If Jon's claim to the throne is just, and if he is a man we can trust, is it not better to see him upon the throne than Joffrey or Stannis or some other pretender who might do us harm?" "You speak of him like you know him," Roose Bolton said quietly. Robb squared his shoulders. "I grew up with him. Jon was raised among us. He is as much a Stark in his values and heart as you or I, and if half his blood is Targaryen, that might be a blessing or a curse. But I know Jon, and he would not bring the dragons down upon us, figuratively or literally." Edmure Tully, pale from the revelations, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, do you propose that we abandon your claim to the kingship?" A hush fell again. Robb closed his eyes for a moment, his father's voice echoing in his thoughts. "Love is the death of duty. But perhaps love could guide duty here. The realm had bled enough, his men had died in droves. And behind it all, the memory of Jon's earnest face, that unwavering sense of honor. If there was one man in Westeros who would not abuse the Iron Throne, it was Jon. "Yes," Robb said, forcing calm into his voice. "I do. I intend to back Jon Snow's claim if he wishes it. I will ask for the North to remain free and for our people to be protected. But I will lay aside my own claim to the Iron Throne if that means we can end this war and see a just king upon it instead." An uproar of protest followed. The Great John stood so abruptly his chair toppled over. "We crowned you. We bent the knee to you. We cannot simply hold your tongue," Robb snapped with a rare flash of anger. "I am your king by your own acclamation, so hear me out. This war, day by day, is killing us. The Lannisters have the gold, the Tyrells have the harvests, and soon the winter will come in full. The North will suffer. Unless we find a path to peace that protects our interests, I fear it will be our doom. Backing Jon may be that path. And if any of you truly knows Jon Snow, you would know the man is as honorable as my father. I trust him with Winterfell, with the entire realm, more than I trust any Southerner. But that choice is mine to make. I do not force you. If you cannot stand behind me in this, then say so now. I will decide how best to proceed." Catelyn pressed her lips together. She had once seen Jon as the living proof of her husband's betrayal. Yet her eyes now showed not hatred, but an echo of guilt and sorrow. Perhaps she remembered the times she had been cold to him, the times he yearned for acceptance. She had been carrying that bitterness for years. Now she knew that her husband had been faithful. Her face wavered with conflicting emotions, but she stepped forward and spoke softly. "Jon loved your father, and your father loved him. If these are truly Lyanna's words, if these are your father's confessions, then we owe him a debt. If you believe in him, Robb, then I will support you." Her words as Lady Stark carried weight. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Edmure, her brother, nodded warily. The Great Jon looked as though he might smash another table, but at length he gave a begrudging grunt. "If you think that bastard, Targaryen or no, can do us more good than a continued war, then I shall not be the one to call you a fool." But his face said he was full of reservations. Roose Bolton said nothing, only studied Robb with his flat, calculating gaze. That alone put Robb on edge, but he kept his face composed. "Very well," he said at last. "We will proceed carefully. I will travel north with my guard. We need to find Jon if we are to make any alliance. The Night's Watch might not easily release him, but if he is truly who we think he is, perhaps he will not refuse our call." Catelyn spoke again. "Jon went to the Wall, if I recall. Ned let him choose. He took the black willingly. It is a vow for life." Edmure frowned. "Then how can he take the throne?" Robb looked around at them. "These are extraordinary times. If Jon truly has the greatest claim, the lords of the realm may find ways to release him from his vows. Or perhaps the Watch itself, for the sake of the realm, would let him go. Do we not recall that Aemon Targaryen himself once served in the Watch, relinquishing his claim? Times change, and so do allegiances. The realm's need may outweigh the vow." No one had an easy answer. Oath-breaking was no small matter. Yet the justification was compelling. If Jon Snow, in truth, was the rightful king, then the stability of Westeros might hang upon that revelation. Robb cleared his throat. "For now, we keep this secret among ourselves. We ride north. We see if there is a way to free Jon from his vows, or if there is a compromise. Meanwhile, we do not antagonize the Lannisters unnecessarily. Send out no ravens proclaiming a new Targaryen heir. That would just paint a target on Jon's back." "Understood." They nodded slowly. Quiet weighed heavy on the room. Finally, Robb rose, giving them leave to depart. As the men filed out, some sullen, some fearful, Catelyn remained behind. She touched Robb's hand gently. "I never thought I would hear that Ned had spared me so much pain. I have been unkind to Jon. All these years, Robb. How can I face him now?" Robb rested his hand over hers. "He loves you, Mother. He might not show it, and you might have never returned it, but he loves you because he loves this family. If the day comes that we stand before him, I trust he will understand. There has been enough suffering." She nodded and withdrew, her footsteps echoing faintly. Robb sank back onto the chair, alone with his thoughts, adrenaline still coursing through him from the confrontation. He half expected the men to revolt, but they had stayed. It was a relief, though not an overwhelming one. The war was far from done, and much could go wrong in the days ahead. But for the moment, at least, there was hope flickering like a candle in the darkness. In the following days, they made their preparations. Rumors spread among the ranks that there was a new plan afoot, perhaps some negotiation with the Night's Watch, or with a northern power that might shift the tides of war. But Robb kept the truth close. He allowed only his mother and his closest advisors to know the secret. One morning, a messenger arrived with word that the dire situation at the wall was growing worse. There were whispers of the dead walking. Wildlings were amassing under some self-styled king named Mansraider. The cold was creeping ever southward. When Robb heard these tales, a shiver crawled up his spine. Jon was in the thick of it, serving with the watch. He remembered how Jon had always wanted a place to belong, how the Night's Watch beckoned to him because it was a path to respect and purpose. Now the realm needed purpose more than ever, especially if those rumors were true. Robb made the announcement that the army would march north. He had decided to move quickly, worried that each passing day could mean a step closer to some unknown catastrophe beyond the wall. The men grumbled. They had expected to march on Lannister lands, or at least to hold Riverrun. But Riverrun was not entirely secured, and Walder Frey's loyalty was always in doubt. The Blackfish would remain behind to fortify the castle in the name of House Tully. In the meantime, Robb and a significant portion of his forces would venture back up the neck, through Moat Cailin, and onward to Winterfell. Felt strange for Robb to reverse course. When he had first ridden south, it was with the proud ambition to rescue his father and avenge the North. Now, battered by losses and heartbreak, he was traveling in the opposite direction, uncertain of what new threats or alliances awaited him. Still, a sense of destiny tugged at him, urging him forward. He was determined not to let the North collapse beneath Lannister might, nor to let Jon, who might be the realm's best hope, stand alone in the face of White Walkers and monstrous threats. The journey was arduous. Spring had come according to the calendar, but the chill in the air reminded them that winter's shadow was not so easily dispelled. At night, they camped under star-filled skies, the men wary and quiet. Many of them seemed to sense a shift in Robb's priorities. Some asked if they would be returning to Winterfell for good, and whether the war was over. Robb's answers were carefully vague. He had to keep morale intact. They knew he was leading them north for a reason, but many assumed it was to reclaim the North from the Ironborn. Others whispered that he planned to rally more houses to his side, houses that refused to march south. They traveled overland routes that had been used by northern armies for centuries. The ground was rocky, the road often little more than a dirt path winding through the swampy neck. The reeds greeted them with cautious hospitality near Greywater Watch. Robb spent an evening in the presence of Howland Reed, the man rumored to have fought alongside Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy. Robb considered sharing the secret with him. Who else might confirm Ned's last testament but the man who had been there? But caution won out. He feared that the knowledge might slip out prematurely, especially if the Reeds, with their fervent loyalty to the Starks, decided to spread the word among the Crannogmen. Yet Robb studied Howland Reed that night, searching for any hint that the Lord of Greywater Watch might already suspect the truth. Howland had an inscrutable face, and he listened more than he spoke. The conversation meandered over old battles, the doings of the Ironborn, and the difficulty of traveling through the marshes. If he did know anything about Jon's heritage, Howland did not speak of it. Eventually, they pressed on, edging nearer to the north. Days turned to weeks. The men were exhausted, but the promise of seeing their home again gave them strength. When they finally reached Moat Cailin, it was only half occupied by Ironborn. Robb's scouts reported that the enemy presence was small, a token force left behind after King Balon Greyjoy had recalled most of his raiders. A short skirmish saw the Ironborn routed. Many of Robb's soldiers took grim satisfaction in driving them out of the ancient northern stronghold. After ensuring Moat Cailin was secured, Robb pushed onward until they reached Winterfell. He feared what he might find. For the last he had heard, Winterfell had been sacked by Theon Greyjoy, then seized by Ramsay Snow in the name of the Boltons. But in the confusion of war, the details were murky. As they neared the castle, an uneasy quiet settled over them. Smoke no longer rose from its towers, and the banners that once proudly displayed the Stark dire wolf were absent. Winterfell's walls were damaged and scorched. The gates hung crooked, half repaired. A smattering of guardsmen wearing the flayed man of House Bolton patrolled the courtyard. Robb bristled at the sight. He had left Roose Bolton behind for a time, but now in the chaos his bastard had claimed Winterfell? Yet as Robb's host arrived in force, the gates were open to them. Ramsay Snow, now Ramsay Bolton, by some decree, greeted them in the courtyard, a hungry smile on his lips and a lethal glint in his eyes. He knelt before Robb in a show of fealty. "My king, you have returned," he said with a bow, though the words dripped with feigned humility. "We have held Winterfell in your name." Robb dismounted, every instinct screaming that he should not trust this man. He recalled the stories of Ramsay's cruelty, of the flayed corpses discovered outside the walls, of his father's mention of some troubling rumor about the Dreadfort's bastard. But Roose Bolton had written that Ramsay was proving his loyalty by holding the castle. Robb's mouth felt dry. "Rise," he said. "Tell me how Winterfell fares." Ramsay's smile spread like oil on water. "We found it burned, sacked by Theon Greyjoy's men. We ousted them, took Theon captive. He escaped eventually, or so we believe. We have done our best to rebuild, but the costs are high, and your father's, Lord Bolton's, coffers are not endless. We only await your command, your grace. Winterfell is at your disposal." Robb nodded curtly, fighting the urge to recoil. "I see. I thank you for your service." It felt like bile on his tongue, but a confrontation here could spark a civil war within the north. He needed unity, especially now. "We will make do. My mother will oversee the repairs." Ramsay stood aside, letting them pass. Catelyn glanced at him with open distrust. They both remembered how Ned had always warned them to be wary of the Boltons. Still, she said nothing. The army poured into the courtyard, occupying the battered castle. Tents sprouted in the bailey, and the loyal bannermen roamed the corridors, refamiliarizing themselves with the seat of House Stark. In the great hall, Robb took stock of the damage. Parts of the ceiling were charred, and some of the tall windows had been boarded up. The air smelled faintly of ash. As he walked, he remembered the feasts of his youth, the echo of his father's laughter, the cunning smiles of Arya, the gentle presence of Sansa, the bounding energy of Little Rickon, and the solemn closeness of Jon. Jon, who was never allowed at the high table because Catelyn Stark had insisted on boundaries. Now Jon might be the rightful lord of all this and more. It took 2 days for the business of re-establishing Winterfell to settle into a routine. Scouts came and went, and plans were made to continue north. But Robb required more solid news of the Night's Watch and of Jon. He feared that if he simply marched the entire host to the wall, it would raise too many questions. So he chose a smaller party to ride forth with him, Grey Wind at his side, Catelyn, and a handful of trusted guards, including the Great Jon, though it took some persuading to get the Great Jon to agree to a smaller force. Bolton and Ramsay both expressed concern. "The journey is long and treacherous," Roose wrote in a letter to Robb. The man had ridden to the Dreadfort on pressing business, or so he claimed. "Allow my son Ramsay to accompany you for your safety." The idea of being on the road with Ramsay unsettled Robb, but refusing outright might rouse suspicion. So he agreed, hoping to keep an eye on the bastard. Catelyn, for her part, was reluctant to see her son depart again, but she saw the necessity. If they were to broker an arrangement with Jon, it had to be done in person. They needed to see how he fared, how he stood with the Watch, and whether he would even consider relinquishing his vows for a chance at the throne. Privately, she feared Jon might reject them outright. They set forth before dawn. The road from Winterfell to Castle Black was less traveled, but it was straightforward enough. They moved quickly to avoid drawing too much attention. The Great Jon groused about marching in so small a group, but Robb insisted they did not want to appear as if they were attacking the Night's Watch. Ramsay rode with them, though he kept to himself most of the time, sending cold smirks at Catelyn and occasionally talking in circles around the Great Jon. If there was a quiet menace to the bastard, it was overshadowed for now by the uneasy sense of purpose that bound them. Robb's heart pounded every time he thought about what would come when they saw Jon. He still remembered the last time he'd seen him, before Jon left for the wall, the half-awkward embrace that had passed between them. If only he'd known the truth then, if only he'd been able to say, "You are my cousin, but I love you as a brother." Would it have changed Jon's course? Would he have chosen differently? Regrets churned in Robb's stomach as they trudged over wind-blown plains and through patches of boreal forest. They reached the wall in an overcast gloom, the sky pressing heavily on the horizon. Castle Black loomed, its palisades and towers dwarfed by the monstrous sheet of ice that stood behind it. The gates were manned by black-clad watchers who looked down on them with suspicion. One of them called out, "State your business." The Great Jon shouted back, "I carry the king in the north. Open your gates or we'll tear them down." "Great Jon," Robb hissed, "remember, we come in peace." Then he called up to the guardsmen, "I am Robb Stark, king in the north, come to treat with Lord Commander Mormont. Let us pass." After a moment's hesitation, the gates began to creak open. Inside, the courtyard of Castle Black was busy with men engaged in sword drills, tending to ravens, or gathering supplies. But they all paused to stare at the arrival of a once royal caravan. Robb dismounted, took a breath, and asked the first black brother who approached if Jon Snow was present. The man gave him a wary look. "Jon is away, my lord. He was sent on a mission beyond the wall with Corrin Halfhand. He may not return soon, if at all." Robb's heart sank. When did he leave? A while back now. The Lord Commander had him ranging north. We've had other parties going out to track wildlings. We lost contact with them for a time. Catelyn's lips formed a thin line. The great Jon cursed under his breath, and Ramsay's smile slithered. Robb pressed for more information, but it was scarce. The men of the Watch had more pressing concerns. The wildling army rumored to be gathering under Mansraider, the White Walkers, the shortage of supplies. Robb asked after Lord Commander Mormont. He was told the old bear had marched with a large contingent to the Fist of the First Men. That too had ended in disaster. Though details were scarce, the men spoke in hushed tones of dead men walking, of a slaughter at the Fist. The survivors had returned, battered and terrified. Mormont himself was said to be back at Craster's Keep or heading further north. The swirl of conflicting reports made it impossible to know where exactly Jon was or how he fared. But one thing was certain. Jon was not here to speak with them. Robb felt helpless, as though the single step he had hoped to take toward forging a new destiny had been thwarted by the inscrutable workings of fate. He spent the next day speaking with Maester Aemon, a frail but keen-eyed old man who wore the black with quiet dignity. Robb hesitated to share Jon's secret, but if anyone could confirm or deny the Targaryen link, Aemon might have insights. The Maester greeted them politely, acknowledging the presence of Lady Catelyn and the great Jon, giving a cold nod to Ramsay. In the small confines of Aemon's chambers, the Maester offered them wine and bade them speak. Robb, after careful deliberation, decided to reveal a portion of the truth. "Maester," he began, "we have reason to believe Jon Snow is not a bastard. We have reason to believe he is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and my aunt Lyanna Stark." Maester Aemon's milky eyes widened slightly, betraying a rare shock. He folded his hands and breathed out slowly. "I see." His voice trembled just a touch. "That is quite the claim. May I ask how you came by this knowledge?" Robb's voice tightened. "My father, Ned Stark, left a letter describing the circumstances of Jon's birth, how he took it upon himself to protect the boy from King Robert's wrath. It was sealed with the Stark sigil." "I believe it." Aemon nodded, a frown creasing his brow. "It would not be out of character for Lord Eddard. I recall Prince Rhaegar as a solemn, dutiful man, but that was long ago. And I have heard the tales of Lyanna Stark's abduction, though some say she went willingly. If Jon Snow is truly their child, well, that explains the quiet strength I sensed in him." Robb's eyes lit with hope. "So you suspect it might be true?" Aemon sighed. "I have been at the Wall for many, many years. I have seen would-be Targaryens come and go. I witnessed the realm forget my family name, except to curse it. But the boy, Jon, he does indeed carry something of our blood, if these claims are to be believed. I cannot say for certain, for I never saw proof, but I have suspected. There is a manner about him, an air of destiny, if you will pardon the poetic sentiment. Yet I am a maester bound to serve. And Jon has taken the black." Catelyn broke in, her voice subdued. "We fear for him. If he is beyond the wall, can we help him? And if he returns, can we free him from his vows?" Aemon's frown deepened. "I cannot speak for the entire Night's Watch, but we are at our weakest. We have lost men. The wildlings threaten to cross the wall in greater numbers than ever before. If Jon Snow is indeed a Targaryen princeling, I do not know how the men of the Watch will react. Some might be inspired, others might feel betrayed that he kept such a secret. Or that the realm might draw him away. The great Jon grumbled, "We only want to see if we can put an end to this blasted war. If the boy's the rightful king, maybe we all stand a chance at peace." Ramsay said nothing, but his eyes glittered with a dark amusement. Robb suspected he was filing away every piece of information for some future advantage. Maester Aemon gently rubbed his temples. "I am too old to argue over whether peace can be brokered by a Targaryen or a Stark. All I know is that the horrors coming from beyond the wall threaten every man, woman, and child in these 7 kingdoms. If Jon can unite us, so be it. But he is not here, and we know not his fate." Robb clenched his fists. "Then I will go beyond the wall to find him if I must." Aemon's eyebrows shot up in alarm. That is exceedingly dangerous. Mormont's party was nearly destroyed. The wildlings roam in vast numbers, and the others, if the rumors are true, roam as well. Caitlin touched Robb's arm, her voice worried. Please, do not throw your life away. There must be another path. Robb searched Eamon's face. If we wait here, we risk losing John entirely. He could be taken by the others, or killed by wildlings, or vanish without a trace. We have come this far for him. I will not go back to Winterfell empty-handed, leaving him to whatever fate. If the realm needs him, we cannot let him vanish. Eamon's expression was grave. I see the determination in you, my lord. Very well. I shall see if I can find more information on the ranging parties. Perhaps there are survivors from Mormont's host who can guide you. In the meantime, I must caution you, venturing beyond the wall is not like riding across the Neck or the King's Road. It is wild, untamed, and death haunts every hill and valley. Robb nodded, acknowledging the risk. Caitlin looked as if she might protest further, but she held her tongue. The great John gave Robb a solemn nod. If we go prepared, he said simply. Ramsay sneered, oh, I'm eager to see the white lands beyond the wall. Perhaps I'll bring back a nice pelt. Robb resisted the urge to lash out at the bastard's nonchalance. Instead, he turned to Maester Eamon one more time. Thank you for your counsel. We shall stay in Castle Black for a short while, gather supplies and men brave enough to join us. Then I will find John and bring him back if he still lives. When they left Eamon's chambers, the wind outside had picked up, howling against the wooden walls of Castle Black. A scattering of snow whirled through the air. Robb couldn't shake the cold in his bones, as if foretelling what lay ahead. In the days that followed, they spoke with any ranger who might have heard news of Jon Snow. Stories varied. Some claimed Jon had killed Qhorin Halfhand and defected to the wildlings. Others said he was acting as a spy. No one knew for certain, and the tension only deepened in Robb's chest. If Jon had truly gone over to the free folk, how could he be the realm's savior? Unless it was part of some ruse. Jon's sense of honor was unyielding. Robb refused to believe he would betray the Watch so easily. Eventually, one ranger, named Gren, came forward, having recently returned from a disastrous expedition. He told them that Jon had indeed traveled with Qhorin, and that Qhorin had likely orchestrated a plan to have Jon pretend to join the wildlings. The details were murky, but Gren believed Jon had done so on the Halfhand's orders to gain intelligence about Mance Rayder's intentions. Robb seized on this information. If that's the case, then perhaps we can find him among the wildlings if we go far enough. You'll be risking your lives, Gren warned, shivering at the memory of the cult. Mance has a large army, thousands and thousands of free folk, giants, all manner of wild things. They are gathering at a place called the Frostfangs. Jon might be with them. Or he might have been discovered and killed. It's impossible to say. Robb understood the danger, but time was slipping through his fingers. He felt an urgent need to act, not just for the sake of the realm, but for Jon himself. For so many years, he had wanted to protect Jon, even though Jon rarely needed protecting. This was something else entirely. The war had taught Robb that inaction could be fatal. He convened a small council in the common hall of Castle Black. Caitlin, the great Jon, Ramsay, and a few black brothers, including Gren and Dalarised, stood around a rough table with maps of the area beyond the wall. Torches flickered, casting wavering shadows across their faces. Robb pointed to a swath of mountainous terrain labeled as the Frostfangs. This is where they say Mance Rayder's host is gathering. If Jon is with them, we have to approach carefully. A large force will draw too much attention. We will take a small group, just enough to defend ourselves, but not so many that we look like an invading army. Caitlin shook her head in trepidation, but she did not argue. The great Jon nodded. I'll go with you, lad. I'm not afraid of a few wildlings. Ramsay raised an eyebrow. And what of me, your grace? Do you wish me to stay behind with the crows? Robb stared him down, uncertain of which was the lesser evil. Leaving Ramsay behind might invite sabotage at Castle Black, or letting him come along might risk a dagger in the back out in the wild. In the end, Robb decided it might be better to keep an eye on him. You can join us, yes, but follow my orders. Ramsay smirked. Of course, my king. And so the party was decided. Robb, the great Jon, Ramsay, and about 20 men from Robb's personal guard, men he trusted implicitly. From the Night's Watch, only Gren and Ed volunteered as they believed in Jon's mission and wanted to help him. The others could not be spared. Caitlin, racked with worry, would remain at Castle Black to wait. She did not want to see her son risking his life again, but she had little choice. She knew it was his duty and his decision. Before Robb departed, she embraced him tightly, whispering, "Bring Jon home. Bring him home. And bring yourself back, too." Robb felt the strain in her voice and nodded, pressing his lips to her brow. "I promise." As they passed through the massive tunnel under the wall, the cold air blasted them with renewed vigor. The sunlight glittered on the icy ramparts overhead. On the other side, the true north stretched out, vast, white, and silent, broken only by patches of dark forest and ridges of stone. The wind carried an eerie howl, and even the Great John fell quiet as they ventured into this realm of cold and ghosts. For days they traveled in the wilderness, guided by Gren and Ed, who knew some of the rangers' paths and hidden caches. They made camp in shallow caves or under the shelter of evergreen boughs. The snow thickened as they pressed deeper. Sometimes they saw giant footprints in the snow or heard distant horns echoing across the tundra. Shadows flitted among the pines, glimpses of feral men or beasts. Robb had never felt so vulnerable. The men carried torches, but the nights were long, and the dark was full of strange cries. Once or twice, Ramsay vanished briefly into the trees, claiming he heard something or needed to relieve himself. Each time he returned with a new smirk, as if he had discovered some private joke. The Greatjon's boisterous demeanor had dimmed to a grim vigilance. He muttered that the wildlings might not be so easily negotiated with if they caught them. The group pressed on, aware that one misstep could mean death. Robb's thoughts turned constantly to John. If he had indeed infiltrated the wildling ranks, how close was he to discovery? Or had he already been found out? On the 8th day, they sighted smoke rising from beyond a ridge. Peering down cautiously, they saw a large encampment of wildlings spread across a low valley, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them. Tents and makeshift shelters dotted the area, with penned animals and watchfires. Farther out, giant shapes moved, literal giants, taller than any man, herding woolly mammoths. The men exchanged uneasy glances. The Great John silently mouthed, "Gods be good." At the sight of so many, Ramsay watched with an odd fascination, as though he were eyeing fresh prey. Gren and Ed scanned the camp, searching for any sign of John. Robb whispered, "If John is down there, we need a plan to make contact without being slaughtered. Perhaps we can wave a flag of truce." Gren hissed back, "A truce with wildlings? Some might talk, but others would just as soon slit our throats. Mance Raider is said to be open to parley, though. He used to be a brother of the Watch." Robb considered. "Then maybe we risk it. If we hide in the hills, we'll never find John. We need to approach. Are you willing to do that?" The Great John nodded. Better to face them head-on. They decided to approach on horseback, carrying no weapons in hand, though their swords remained sheathed at their sides. They carried a white cloth tied to a spear to indicate peaceful intentions. The tension was thick as they descended into the valley, the wildling scouts quickly spotting them. Horn calls echoed, and soon a band of rough-looking warriors emerged to surround them. One of them, a tall woman with red hair braided back, snarled, "Who are you, Crow?" She recognized Gren and Ed's black cloaks. Her eyes flicked to the others. "And who are these fancy Southrons?" Robb raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I am Robb Stark, King in the North. I seek parley with Mance Raider, if he will grant it." The wildling woman laughed bitterly. "King in the North, is it? We've had enough of your kings. But if you want Mance, you'll get Mance." She gestured with a spear. "Surrender your weapons and follow me." Robb hesitated, but complied. The Great John grumbled, but unbuckled his sword belt. Ramsay gave an exaggerated shrug and handed over his knife, though Robb suspected he might have more hidden on his person. The rest of the group followed suit. Wildlings hustled them toward T, the center of the encampment, where a large tent stood. They were ushered inside. Seated on furs was a man with weathered features and watchful eyes. He wore no crown, but carried himself like a leader. He examined Robb and his companions with a cool, assessing gaze. "So the king in the north comes to treat with the king beyond the wall. What do you want, Stark?" Robb inclined his head slightly in greeting. "I've come seeking one of your men, a fellow by the name of Jon Snow." He paused, noticing movement in the shadows. A woman with fierce eyes stood behind Mance, her bow slung across her back. Another man, tall and gangly, hovered nearby with a spear. "If Jon is with you, I'd speak with him." Mance raised an eyebrow. "Jon Snow, the crow-turned cloak we picked up in the mountains. Why do you want him?" Robb swallowed the tension in his throat. "I have reason to believe he's family. I'm concerned for his well-being." Mance studied him. "Family, you say? I knew Eddard Stark once, a man of honor. He never spoke of a bastard that might be your brother." Robb stiffened. "That's because he wasn't his bastard. He was my cousin, my aunt's son. My father raised him. His name and story are complicated, but suffice to say, I need to speak with him. It could affect the fate of all the kingdoms, and perhaps yours as well." A woman's voice cut through the tent, edged with a northern burr. "He's sleeping in my tent right now, if you must know." Robb turned to see a fierce, attractive woman with red hair parted around her shoulders. She had a disdainful glare. "Name's Ygritte. Jon's my man now. If you want to talk to him, you'll have to go through me, too." Robb's heart pounded in relief at the confirmation that Jon was alive. "Then bring him, please." Mance nodded at Ygritte, who ducked out of the tent. The tension that followed was palpable. The wildlings stared at Robb's group with open suspicion. Ramsay eyed them back with a subtle grin that made Robb uneasy. The great Jon stood tall, refusing to be intimidated, and Ed tried to avoid everyone's gaze. After a few moments, the tent flap opened, and Jon Snow entered. He wore ragged furs, looking leaner and more weathered than Robb remembered. He held himself with quiet caution, his dark eyes flicking from face to face until they landed on Robb. For an instant, they widened in surprise and emotion. "Robb," Jon said, voice laced with disbelief. What in the seven hells are you doing here?" Robb felt a wave of conflicting emotions crash over him. He wanted to stride across the tent and embrace Jon, but he held himself in check. "Jon, it's been a long time. I came to bring you home." The words sounded simpler than the reality. "I have learned things that change everything we thought we knew. About your birth, your parentage, and your destiny, Jon. The realm needs you." Jon's jaw tightened. A swirl of questions and confusion played across his face. He glanced at Mance. "I thought the realm only needed me with the Night's Watch. I'm undercover here." He cut himself off, perhaps realizing that not everyone in the tent might know that. Ygritte made a slight face, but said nothing. Mance, however, seemed unconcerned. Perhaps the king beyond the wall had gleaned that Jon's defection was never entirely genuine, but allowed it for reasons of his own. Robb drew a breath. "Jon, we discovered that you are not our father's bastard. You are Lyanna Stark's son, and Rhaegar Targaryen's." Jon stared at him as though he'd lost his mind. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "That's impossible. My father, Lord Eddard, he never—" Robb shook his head. "He never told you, but he left proof. In a letter I found after he died. Maester Aemon suspects it as well. I know it's a shock, but believe me, the truth is there. The blood of Targaryen kings flows in your veins, and the blood of House Stark. You, Jon, might have the strongest claim to the Iron Throne." Silence fell in the tent. Ygritte stared at Jon, her lips parted in shock. The wildlings shifted. Mance rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The great Jon stood behind Robb, arms folded as if daring anyone to refute it. Ramsay Bolton watched Jon with a predatory interest. Jon finally found his voice. You want me to believe that I'm the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, the man who supposedly kidnapped my aunt and started a war that killed thousands? And you want me to what? Take the Iron Throne?" His tone was incredulous, with more than a hint of scorn. "Why would I do that? I'm a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. I have a duty to stop what's coming from beyond the wall." Robb took a step closer, speaking earnestly. "I understand you have a duty. But if the White Walkers are real, if winter is truly coming in full force, we need a united realm to stand against them. Jon, the North can't fight alone. The Night's Watch can't fight alone. And the Southern Kingdoms are in chaos. The Lannisters hold the throne. War rages on. But if the rightful heir arose, someone the Lords might rally behind, we could unite the realm's armies. We could stand a chance against the dead." John's voice shook with pent-up frustration. So you want me to leave the watch, break my vows, and become a king? Abandon my brothers here who are fighting for their lives? Robb, you don't know what I've seen out here. The free folk, they're just people trying to survive. The Night's Watch is trying to hold the line, but we're stretched thin. You speak of uniting the realm, well, that's good, but I can't just waltz away and let my brothers die. The great Jon chimed in, if you truly are a Targaryen, you could do more for the Watch as king than as a mere brother with a vow. That's the point, lad. The entire realm's falling apart and you might just be the glue to hold it together. Jon rubbed his forehead, clearly torn. Ygritte regarded him, her expression caught between confusion and concern. At length, Jon replied, I need time to think, and I can't leave now. Mance is preparing to lead these people south. They flee the White Walkers. If we can't find a way to help them, they'll try to breach the wall by force. Thousands will die on both sides. Robb looked at Mance. And you would lead an invasion? Mance shrugged. I lead a migration. Call it an invasion if you wish. My people just want to survive the terrors beyond the wall. But the crows won't let us pass peacefully. Robb considered. If I can get the North to open a path for you, if you vow to keep the peace and not raid our lands, could that avert bloodshed? Mance looked at him wryly. You speak as if you're in a position to make such promises. Robb met his gaze steadily. I am the king in the North. For now, if I back Jon for the Iron Throne, then the North will follow me, and him. If we can secure a broader alliance, perhaps we can find a solution that spares the free folk and the people of the North alike. The real war is against the others, not each other. A long silence stretched out. Jon exhaled, looking at Ygritte, who gave him a slow nod. Then he turned back to Robb. Let me speak to Mance and the free folk. There's more at stake here than a crown. If you're serious about forging alliances, it can't just be about me taking the throne. It has to be about saving lives, all lives, wildling or kneeler. Robb nodded solemnly. Agreed. Mance tipped his head. I'll listen, but be warned, Stark. The free folk have little love for the men of Winterfell. You'd best prove you're not just another southern king looking to put us in chains. Otherwise, your noble quest might end in a row of heads on spikes. The tension in the tent began to ease, replaced by the weight of urgent negotiations. Robb realized he was not just here to find Jon. He was standing at a crossroads that might shape the fate of the entire realm. If they could unite the wildlings and the North, if Jon could embrace his true heritage, if they could gather enough forces to quell the Lannisters and stand against the Night King. Perhaps there was hope. Later that evening, Robb and Jon found a moment alone, stepping outside into the cold night where the moonlight glistened on the snowy fields. Ygritte stayed behind, giving them space. Their breath frosted in the air as they stood face to face for the first time in what felt like ages. Robb's chest tightened with affection and regret. I'm sorry you had to learn it this way, Robb said softly. I know it's a lot to take in. Jon nodded, still shell-shocked. You're telling me my father wasn't my father, that my mother was your father's sister, and that I'm somehow a Targaryen prince? You have to admit, it's hard to believe. Robb let out a dry chuckle. I didn't want to believe it either, at first. But I trust our father too much to doubt. He hid this secret all these years. And he did it to protect you. Jon's eyes shone with unshed tears. I always wondered why he never spoke of my mother. I hated him for it sometimes, thought he was ashamed of me. Robb closed the distance, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. He wasn't ashamed. He was terrified Robert Baratheon would kill you, the last Targaryen heir. He risked his honor, letting the realm believe he was unfaithful. For you. Jon lowered his head, a tear slipping down his cheek. I never understood, and now he's gone. Robb felt his own eyes sting. He did what he had to do. And now it falls to us. Jon, the realm is in chaos. The Lannisters hold King's Landing, Stannis Baratheon fights for the throne, and Daenerys Targaryen, Rhaegar's sister, is rumored to be across the narrow sea with dragons. The North is scarred and Winterfell was sacked. If you could claim the throne, you could unify the houses that remain loyal to our father's memory, maybe even form a truce with Stannis or with Daenerys. The real threat is the White Walkers. We need everyone's help to stop them. Jon swallowed, searching Robb's gaze. And you? The men named you king in the North. Are you truly willing to give that up for me? Robb nodded, conviction in his eyes. I never wanted a crown. I only wanted to protect the North, avenge our father, and see justice done. If you can do that, if you can be the king the realm needs, then you have my sword and you have the loyalty of the North. I swear it. Jon let out a shaking breath. You put too much faith in me. He paused as if searching for the right words. I'm just Jon Snow. I don't know how to be a king. Robb gripped Jon's shoulder more firmly. No one does until they're forced to. Our father didn't know how to be the warden of the North when he was a boy at the Eyrie, but he learned. You have the blood of the dragon and the wolf. You have a good heart and you understand honor. Those are rarer qualities than you think. If there's anyone who won't abuse that throne, it's you. Jon closed his eyes, torn by indecision. I still have my vows to consider. The Night's Watch oath, we are to take no wives, hold no lands, father no children. We are the shield that guards the realms of men. Robb sighed. You are more than that vow now, Jon. And perhaps the Watch itself will see reason. If you can protect the realm better as king, they might release you from your vows. Or perhaps you'll find a compromise. But please, don't let the realm descend into endless war or fall beneath the White Walkers because of an oath that no longer serves the greater good. Jon opened his eyes, taking in the moonlit expanse around them, the hush of the wildling camp. He glanced at Ygritte's distant figure. I will think on it. I owe Mance my word not to betray him, and I owe the Watch the chance to save them from the White Walkers. I won't make a decision lightly. Robb nodded, relieved that Jon hadn't dismissed the idea outright. That's all I ask. We'll stay here until we figure out a path forward. Jon nodded, turning to look at the flickering fires that dotted the valley below. The wind carried the faint sound of distant conversation and a child's cry. Wildlings, indeed, were just people, families seeking refuge. And if I do accept this, what then? Do we try to march them south of the wall? We'll have to arrange a passage, Robb said. We'll need the Watch's cooperation, as well as the Northern Lords. But if I present you as the rightful king, and if you grant the free folk land or safe haven, perhaps it can be done. We can't ignore them, Jon, or they'll try to storm the wall, and we'll have bloodshed. We need unity. Jon bit his lip. Unity. 7 hells. I never expected to hear that word coming from a Stark seeking me out in a wildling camp. I suppose everything is changing. Everything? Robb echoed, the cold wind whipping his cloak. In his mind's eye, he saw a new dawn over a united realm, with Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, perhaps, at its helm, forging alliances to defeat the darkness. Or he saw a dire future if they failed. A realm splintered, the dead rising, all they loved crushed by unstoppable forces. We must be the ones to guide that change, or it will consume us. Jon gave a final nod, then drew Robb into a quick, fierce embrace. It was the hug of 2 brothers, not parted by the truth of their parentage, but bound closer by it. Both had lost so much, Ned, Winterfell, their sense of certainty in the world. But in that moment, in the cold night of the wild north, they found a fragile hope in each other. They parted, wordless understanding passing between them. Jon stared into the distance, as if already wrestling with the choices that lay ahead. Robb placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, feeling the chill metal. He would defend Jon's claim with every ounce of strength he possessed, not out of ambition, but out of love and the belief that this was their best chance. Soon, the next steps would unfold. Parley with Mance, negotiations with the Watch, the question of returning south to confront the Lannisters and perhaps the Baratheons. But in this moment, brother stood with brother, forging a promise that might define the fate of the 7 kingdoms. They returned to Mance's tent, prepared to shape the beginnings of an accord between the free folk and the king in the north, all in the name of a man who had once believed himself a bastard. In the days that followed, they would face suspicion, sabotage, and doubt. But in Robb's heart, he carried an unwavering resolve. He had embraced Jon's secret, and he would bear it forward, even if it meant letting go of his own claim. The time of separate kingdoms and petty wars had to end, or they would all perish in the coming storm. In the realm's darkest hour, a hidden Targaryen might be the light that guided them. And so Robb marched onward into the swirling chaos of destiny, bound by brotherhood and hope, determined to see Jon Snow crowned and the living united before the icy dawn of war descended upon them all. They lingered in Mance Rayder's tent as torches burned low, their flames guttering in the drafts of the cold northern wind. The heavy scent of wet leather and smoke drifted around them, stirring old memories in Robb Stark of Winterfell's own courtyard on a rainy day. But here, nothing was familiar except his brother's face. Jon stood close by, posture guarded, arms folded across his chest. The torchlight danced over the planes of Jon's cheeks, revealing the distance he had traveled from the boy Robb once knew to the man he had become. The ragged fur cloak on Jon's shoulders seemed to weigh him down, as if to remind him of the choices he had made in the wake of joining the wildlings. Yet behind his dark eyes flickered a new awareness, a reevaluation of who he might be. Not just a bastard, but a Targaryen heir. Mance regarded them all in measured silence. The king beyond the wall looked as though he were balancing a sword on the tip of a finger. One slip and everything could fall to ruin. His gaze shifted to the great Jon, whose hand twitched with visible impatience near his empty scabbard. Then it slid across to Ramsay, who stood with an unsettling smile, and to Gren and Ed in their black cloaks. Finally, Mance fixed his attention on Robb. In my camp you see the free folk, spearwives and raiders, clansmen and giants, families with children and elders who can barely walk. You say you want to help us cross south. Yet you know the Night's Watch stands in our way. How do you plan to convince them to open the gate to thousands they've sworn to repel? Robb dipped his head. It's a fair question, but I have influence with the Watch, or at least with its leadership. Lord Commander Mormont once honored my father. And Jon here, no matter how things stand, is still technically a brother of the Watch. We can begin a dialogue. If we cannot find a peaceful solution, then blood will be shed. I'd prefer to avoid that. Ygritte, standing behind Jon with her arms crossed, let out a derisive huff. The Crows'll have to do more than talk if they mean to let us pass. The free folk won't kneel to any bloody throne. Mance's smile was faint. They won't. But I wasn't always a king, you know. I was a crow myself once. I know that some of my people yearn to live free under a sky not haunted by the others. If you can promise a safe passage, I might persuade them to keep the peace, at least until they've settled. But what about the lords in the north? Will they stand by as we walk through their fields? They follow me, Robb said, though he felt the weight of those words. Did they truly follow him even now, after he had abandoned any conquest for the Iron Throne? Or did the men only remain with him because they had yet to see his new intentions tested? The north bleeds. We can't afford more slaughter, not when winter's shadow looms so close. Many would prefer peace, but I can't promise every lord will. Some cling to old hatreds. Jon listened with rapt attention, eyes flicking between them. Mance, let me speak to them. Let me speak to Castle Black. I can try to broker a truce. If we fail, I know you'll march on the wall one way or another. He hesitated, the flickering torches casting uneasy shadows on his face. Before I go, I need to decide something. Am I still a brother of the Watch, or am I something else? I won't lie to you. Robb's news changes things. Mance studied him intently. A true free folk would say, be who you are. We don't care if you're a king or a crow, only that you deal with us honestly. But if you're asking whether I trust you, the answer is yes and no. I see your struggle. I respect it. But if you betray us, I'll have your head on a spike for all to see. Ygritte touched Jon's arm, her voice low. You won't betray us, will you? Jon placed his hand over hers. No, I won't betray you. Ramsay rolled his shoulders. Touching loyalties, I'm sure. Perhaps we should hurry along to the next step. Unless you'd like to continue trading meaningful stares in a tent that smells of goat. Robb stiffened, aware of how the bastard of Bolton taunted with every slick word. The great Jon shot Ramsay a glare, but said nothing. This was hardly the time for an internal confrontation. They had waded into dangerous waters, and a single misstep could trigger bloodshed, given how on edge everyone seemed. At last, Mance gestured to a crude map pinned to a wooden table by an iron dagger. We'll be here a while yet. Word must spread to all our clans. When we do march, it won't be subtle. If you're to go back to the wall, do it soon. Speak to your Watch. Convince them that turning us away means war and the White Walkers creeping ever closer. And if you can, secure the help of your northern lords. We have thousands of old and young among us who won't survive a battle. Our fighters are fierce but half-starved. The Oth heirs are the real threat, though. I've seen them. We all have. His features darkened with memory. So fix this or watch the realm burn and freeze at the same time. It's as simple as that, Stark. Robb inclined his head. I'll do my best. Jon's jaw clenched. I'll go with you, Robb, but I need a chance to speak to my brothers as well. If I can, I'll find Lord Commander Mormont or whoever leads now and see if reason can prevail. Ygritte snorted. Reason? With crows? Good luck, you. Yet her voice softened when she caught Jon's eye, and Robb noticed a tenderness there that Jon had never been allowed before. Growing up a bastard at Winterfell, love had been in short supply. How odd that he seemed to have found it among the free folk. They departed the tent, escorted by a handful of wildling scouts as they gathered their horses. A swirl of gray clouds hung overhead, threatening more snow. Tents spread across the valley in every direction, smoke curling from their fires. Ragged men and women eyed the visitors. Some spat, others stared with a measure of awe or distrust, and the children scurried back at the sight of the strangers. Giant silhouettes moved in the distance, herding mammoths with slow, purposeful steps. Jon cast a regretful glance toward Ygritte, who stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded tight. They shared one last look. Then he mounted the horse the great Jon handed him. Their group, Robb, Jon, the great Jon, Ramsay, and the handful of Northmen plus Gren and Ed set off through the throng, half expecting an arrow in the back. But the wildlings let them depart unmolested. Perhaps Mance truly did want a chance at peace. As they rode away from the encampment, Robb found his mind spinning with the revelations of the last days. Jon was alive, indeed carrying the secret that could challenge every faction in Westeros. But he was torn by duty, by his vow to the Watch, by his loyalty to the free folk he had come to understand, and by the monstrous threat that lay in the far north. Robb could almost envy his simpler days, when he'd marched south for vengeance against the Lannisters. It had all seemed so clear then. Now the future sprawled before him like a maze with no guaranteed exit. They reached the horizon where the ground began to slope down, revealing the endless pine forests that stretched toward the wall. The journey back to Castle Black was silent except for the crunch of snow under their horses' hooves. The great Jon occasionally let out a puff of steam as he breathed, muttering under his breath about the folly of dealing with wildlings. Ramsay, for once, was quiet, his eyes studying Jon like a hawk. Gren and Ed, traveling side by side, exchanged the occasional comment about how bizarre it felt to leave the Watch's mortal enemies in relative peace. Jon glanced sidelong at Robb. You didn't come all this way alone. My mother... He caught himself pausing. Your mother, Lady Catelyn, is she truly here? She waits at Castle Black. She came with me to see you, though I doubt she ever thought to greet you as anything but Ned Stark's bastard. Robb's expression turned pensive. She knows the truth now. It's shaken her. Jon's eyes, so often guarded, reflected a mix of hurt and hope. Did she say anything? Robb hesitated. She feels guilty for how she treated you. She had no idea. That doesn't erase the past. But I believe she wants to make amends. Jon closed his mouth, thinking of the lonely days in Winterfell's halls, the times Lady Stark's eyes passed over him like he were nothing but air. He forced the memories aside and exhaled a frosty breath. Let her know I hold no grudge. If she'll have peace with me, I'll accept it. They made camp halfway between the wildling camp and the wall, though the distance wasn't far. The winter day was short and darkness came swiftly. They erected a few tents huddled around a modest fire. Gren and Ed took turns standing watch in case a wildling raiding party decided to pounce. Jon tried to get comfortable on the hard ground, but his mind churned with possibilities. The words Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark echoed in his thoughts, unraveling everything he thought he knew about himself. Robb was awake, too, their small fire casting dancing shadows on his fur-lined cloak. He regarded Jon and spoke in a low voice, careful not to wake the others. I know how impossible it sounds. When I first read the letter, I wanted to fling it into the fire, call it a lie. But as soon as I started connecting pieces, Ned Stark's uncharacteristic silence about your mother, the rumors that Rhaegar had absconded with Lyanna and that she died in childbed, the timeline fits. My father wrote that he found her in the Tower of Joy, already weakened, and she made him swear to protect you. Jon stared at the licking flames. I used to dream that my mother was a lady of some small house far away. Something that would make sense. But I never expected this. Robb let his gaze rest on him. The realm will expect you to make a choice soon. My bannermen want me to remain king in the north. Some will never yield to a Targaryen, even if it's you. But I believe many will follow you. They trust me and they'll trust the man I name my brother. If you can promise the north a degree of self-governance or at least respect, they might bend. Jon's brow furrowed. I don't want men bending the knee out of fear or duty. I want them ready to face what's coming. The White Walkers are real. I've seen their whites. That's why the wildlings are fleeing. We can't be fighting among ourselves when an army of the dead is marching south. Then we share a goal, Robb murmured. That might be enough. Jon said nothing more, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. He thought of the rifts among the living, wildlings against crows, north against south, Targaryen claims against Baratheon or Lannister. If the living couldn't unite, the darkness beyond the wall would devour them all. He watched the embers until his eyes grew heavy, drifting into a restless sleep. At dawn, the camp stirred. Ramsay was already on his feet, fiddling with a small blade as he examined the sky. The great Jon muttered that they should hurry on, and Gren grunted agreement. They mounted, forging ahead over the snowy expanse, until at last the wall's colossal height loomed before them. Jon felt a pang in his chest at the sight of it. Whatever else happened, part of him would always consider this place home. Castle Black emerged from behind ice-shrouded barricades. The black-cloaked sentries high on the parapets spotted them and called out. The gate opened slowly, and soon Robb and his party were once again inside the courtyard, greeted by a swirl of tension and curiosity. Brothers of the Watch recognized Jon. Some approached with uncertain expressions, as if not sure whether to treat him as friend or turncloak. Within minutes, Catelyn Stark appeared, cloaked in heavy wool. She looked exhausted but relieved, her eyes darting anxiously over the men until they fell on Jon. Something flickered in her face. Reluctance, regret, and, at last, a painful form of acceptance. She inclined her head to him. Jon. He bowed in return, a gesture that reflected his old habits at Winterfell. My lady. A faint tremor touched Catelyn's voice. You are no bastard, if Ned's words are true. You are my husband's nephew. My nephew. Jon, uncertain how to respond, simply nodded. A muscle in his jaw twitched as he tried to shape a polite answer. I am sorry for any resentment. If I had known the truth. Catelyn shook her head quickly. No, the blame lies with me. I was cruel to you, seeing you as a living reminder of supposed infidelity. I never dreamed. We have lost so much, Jon. We can't afford further estrangement. His throat was tight. Thank you, Lady Catelyn. They stood in awkward silence until Robb ushered them gently into the warmth of a small interior chamber away from prying eyes. Snow drifted in the courtyard and Black brothers bustled about on daily tasks, but Robb wanted some measure of privacy. Gren and Ed parted from them, saying they would find their fellow rangers. Ramsay made a mocking show of stretching his back, then followed Robb inside with a bored look, though his gaze never stopped roaming around as if seeking weaknesses. The great Jon stationed himself by the door, arms crossed. Within the small room, warmed by a brazier of coals, Catelyn removed her hood. We must speak of next steps. Did you find Mance's radar? Did you find what you were seeking? Robb nodded. Yes. Mance is willing to discuss peaceful passage for the free folk if we can convince the Watch and the Northern Lords to allow it. Otherwise, he'll march on the wall and many will die. He glanced at Jon. But that's only the start. We also need to consider how to present Jon's parentage and if he will claim the Iron Throne. Catelyn's face, pale from the cold, grew paler still at the mention of that dreaded seat. The realm is fractured. The Lannisters hold King's Landing. Stannis Baratheon wages his war from Dragonstone, and news from the Riverlands suggests our position is precarious at best. My brother Edmure is trying to defend Riverrun, but there are rumors that Walder Frey grows restless at your alliance with. She stopped, noticing the presence of Ramsay, whose eyes glinted with curiosity. She pressed her lips together. We must weigh carefully what to do next. At that moment, a steward arrived, bowing low. Begging your pardon, my lord, my lords, my lady, but the acting Lord Commander wishes to see you. He heard you returned with Jon Snow. Jon's brow rose. Acting Lord Commander? What of Lord Commander Mormont? The steward's voice wavered. Lost beyond the wall, they say. Some men came back, but not all. Ser Jeremy Ricker took command briefly, but he was slain by whites. Now Ser Dennis Mallister and Ser Alistair Thorne vie for leadership with Bowen Marsh in the mix. It's chaos, my lord. They're holding a meeting in the common hall. Jon felt a pang of grief for Mormont, though he had feared this outcome from the moment he heard rumors of disaster at the Fist of the First Men. He remembered the old bear's stern visage, the sense of paternal guidance he offered. If he was truly gone, the Night's Watch was leaderless, fracturing under the weight of threat. "I'll come," Jon said, voice thick. Robb cast a cautious glance at Jon. "If you'd prefer not to face them alone," Jon straightened. "I'm not alone. You're here." He let out a breath, ignoring the flutters in his stomach. He had left as a brother on a secret mission, but returned in muddy circumstances, rumored to have joined the wildlings. Now he carried a truth that could overturn loyalties. "Let's go." Caitlin made to follow, but Robb gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mother, perhaps you should rest a while. The Night's Watch has little love for politics, and they may resent having a highborn lady present. Jon and I can speak on your behalf." She frowned but relented, stepping back. The great Jon stayed behind as well, preferring to watch over Lady Stark. Ramsay, however, insisted on joining them. "I've never seen a pack of crows argue over scraps of authority," he said wryly. "This should be amusing." Robb disliked the idea, but refusing might provoke conflict. He gave Ramsay a tight nod. Together, he and Jon followed the steward out, crossing Castle Black's courtyard. Despite the swirling flurries, men were everywhere, sharpening weapons, repairing ramparts, fletching arrows. The tension in the air was palpable. The steward led them to a large building that served as both a common hall and gathering place. Inside, the walls were lined with torches that did little to dispel the gloom. A group of black brothers waited around a long wooden table, some sitting, others standing in clusters. Their faces bore weariness, frustration, and suspicion. At the head of the table, Ser Alistair Thorne stood with his thin lips pressed together. Beside him was Bowen Marsh, red-faced and tense. Ser Dennis Mallister, an older knight with dignified bearing, sat quietly at the far end, drumming his fingers on the tabletop. A hush fell over them when Jon walked in, accompanied by Robb Stark in his northern furs and Ramsay Bolton with his unsettling smirk. "Alistair," Jon said, offering a curt nod. He knew the man had no fondness for him. "What's happened here?" Ser Alistair's mouth twisted. "What's happened? That's a question, isn't it? The old bear led an ill-fated expedition beyond the wall. The whites tore us apart and only a fraction returned. You, Snow, did not. You ran off with the wildlings, or so we heard. And now you stroll in with a self-proclaimed king in the north? You'll have to explain yourself before you're hanged as a deserter." Several men muttered agreement. Jon kept his composure. "I went under Qhorin Halfhand's orders to infiltrate the wildlings, to learn their plans. Qhorin gave his life to cement my cover. I would never have deserted the Watch by choice." He paused, letting his words sink in. "As for Robb Stark, he is my brother. He came north to find me and to warn you all of the threat we face." Robb stepped forward, feeling the weight of their stares. "The free folk gather in numbers we've never seen, led by Mance Rayder. He wants to lead them south to escape the others. They fear the White Walkers as much as we do. If you do not let them pass, they will try to take the wall by force." Alistair scoffed. "Then let them break themselves against our defenses. It will be a short fight, and the crows will feast well on wildling corpses." Bowen Marsh rubbed his temples. "We lost so many at the Fist. We can't man the entire wall. If Mance truly has thousands, we might be overrun." Ser Dennis Mallister cleared his throat. "We must find a better way. If the free folk truly flee an enemy we cannot ignore, we need to weigh the costs of open war. With Mormont gone, we must choose an acting Lord Commander, someone who can make these decisions." Ser Alistair, evidently sensing an opportunity, folded his arms. "I nominate myself. I served as Master-at-Arms at the Red Keep, commanded the defense here at Castle Black for years, and I understand discipline." Jon recalled Thorne's cruelty, his scorn for any who questioned him, his lack of empathy. But before he could speak, Robb cut in. "This is your internal matter. I cannot choose for you. But I'll say this, the free folk will not wait long. If you choose a Lord Commander who would rather see them die than find a peaceful solution, you risk dooming everyone." A few brothers exchanged skeptical glances. One of them spat on the ground. "A bunch of savages, that's what they are." Jon held his temper in check. "Men, women, children. Giants. If they come at us, we'll kill thousands before they breach the wall, but they have the numbers to overwhelm us eventually. And it won't matter if they do, once the White Walkers come in force, we'll need every living person to help fight them off." Bowen Marsh looked unconvinced. "White Walkers, whites always stories. We've lost men, yes, but do we truly believe an army of the dead marches on us? Ramsay interjected with lazy arrogance. Better to be cautious than to find a white-eyed corpse biting at your throat one cold night. He offered a slick smile. Or so I'm told. Jon refused to let Ramsay's presence distract him. I've seen whites. We fought them at Castle Black before I left. The old bear was attacked by dead men in the Lord Commander's quarters. It's real. Ser Dennis Mallister sighed. I believe you, Jon. I saw the remains of those who returned from the fist. Their eyes told me enough. The threat is real. All right, we cannot dither. Our priority must be defending the wall. If that defense means forging a truce with Mance Rayder, I'd rather do it than watch us all die. Some black brothers grumbled. Ser Alistair's face was pinched, but it seemed that with Mormont gone, he didn't yet have enough sway to outright declare Jon a traitor and have him hanged. The watch was battered, on the brink, and uncertain who to follow. Bowen Marsh exhaled heavily, glancing around at the men. We should hold a formal choosing. We cannot wander leaderless. Let every brother cast a vote for the new Lord Commander. One of the senior rangers rose. And until then, we negotiate with these wildlings? Robb took a step forward. Yes. Let's at least open the possibility. My mother, Lady Caitlin, is here with me. We can act as mediators. But we have another pressing matter. He hesitated, glancing at Jon. We need to talk about Jon's vow. All eyes shifted to Jon. He felt the scrutiny like a hammer blow. Even men who had muttered for negotiation now stared with suspicion. Bowen Marsh shook his head. What about his vow? He is a black brother for life, unless you think deserting and returning with a wildling pelt for a cloak entitles you to something else. Jon's expression hardened. I went beyond the wall to serve the watch. I have never taken a wife, fathered a child, or forsaken my post willingly. But I stand here now having learned truths about my parentage. If I am called to serve the realm in another way, one that might unite the kingdoms against the White Walkers, would you hold me to a vow that could doom us all? A murmur passed through the hall. Alice O'Thorne curled his lip. You have delusions of grandeur, Snow. What nonsense has that pup of Winterfell been filling your head with? Robb tried to speak calmly. It's not nonsense. Jon is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and my aunt Lyanna Stark. My father left proof of this. If the realm recognized him as the rightful king, the uproar was immediate. Men shouted, disbelief and anger roiling in the smoky air. A Targaryen? Is this a jest? We fought a war to rid ourselves of those dragons, Pawn. Hush, hush. Ser Dennis Mallister rapped the table. Silence. His voice, though old, carried enough authority to quell the immediate clamor. Let the lad speak. Robb continued, trying to keep his words steady. I know this seems impossible, but Ned Stark was not the man to lie in such a manner. He took personal shame for years so that King Robert would never discover Jon's parentage. If the Lannisters remain in power, they'll crush the North and ignore the real threat. If Stannis prevails, he might also ignore the threat, or perhaps he will not. But we have no unity. Jon could offer that. As king, he might. We do not serve kings here, a black brother snapped. Our vows forbid it. Jon lifted his hand to stop them. I'm not asking you to serve me. I'm asking if you'll release me from my vow so that I can do what must be done. I'm not certain I even want the throne, but if my claim can unite the realm, we must consider it. Ser Alisos' disdain was cold. This is absurd. The boy's no Targaryen, no prince. He's a traitor, a liar, and possibly a wildling sympathizer. If the watch would set him free, we might as well throw open the gates and let the others inside. Bowen Marsh nodded agreement, though less vehemently. Brother, we do not break vows lightly. We are the swords in the darkness. If any man can discard his black cloak the moment he sees a shiny crown, he's not discarding it for a crown, Robb interrupted, temper flaring. He's trying to save your sorry hides. Listen to yourselves. Mormont is gone, the White Walkers are out there, and you'd hamper your only chance at forging alliances. A hush stretched as men shifted uncomfortably. Dennis Mallister's gaze moved between them. What you propose, Jon, is unprecedented. Brothers of the Watch who've inherited lordships are expected to refuse them or relinquish them to younger siblings. But you speak of the Iron Throne. This is not some petty inheritance. If your claim would help us turn aside the White Walkers, perhaps it's worth considering. He paused, as if weighing each word. And yet the vows are clear. I'm not certain we even have the authority to grant you freedom from them. Only the realm's crisis might do that, if enough lords petition for it. Ser Alistair barked a laugh. Have you lost your wits, Mallister? You're entertaining a traitor's fantasy. Next, you'll be telling us to kneel before him. Mallister's cool eyes flicked to Thorne. I'm no fool. I see the times are dire. I served in the watch long before you arrived, Ser Alisar, and I know that rigid traditions sometimes break under the weight of new realities. If Jon's heritage is true, ignoring it could cost us an alliance. The cost might be the end of everything. Bowen Marsh cleared his throat. Then let us do this properly. We will hold our election for Lord Commander. Whoever is chosen will decide Jon's fate, whether to brand him a deserter or hear him out. Until then, Snow, remain here. You will not be placed in a cell, but you are not free to roam. Is that understood? Jon's face was tight as a drawn bowstring. I'll remain here, yes, but be swift. The wildlings won't wait forever. Robb bowed slightly, acknowledging their terms, but inside, he fumed. The Night's Watch was fractious, battered, and far too stubborn. Still, he understood that they clung to order in a world that was falling apart. Thank you. The meeting broke up with tense mutterings. Some men filed out immediately, casting dark looks at Jon as they went. Others lingered, uncertain, while Mal Lister stood to speak quietly with a small group. Alisar Thorne disappeared behind the swirl of cloaks, no doubt to stir trouble. Bowen Marsh left more slowly, his gaze darting back to Jon once, as if searching for any glimmer of proof or guilt. Robb walked with Jon toward the door where Ramsay lounged, flicking an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. I must say, this was more entertaining than I expected, the bastard murmured. Politics. Always a filthy business. Robb ignored him, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. We'll sort this out. Jon nodded, though he kept his jaw clenched, frustration evident. I need to speak to some of the brothers, see if I can gather support. The last thing we want is Alisar Thorne elected Lord Commander. He'd see me executed before he let me go. Robb pursed his lips. I'll help in any way I can, though my presence might anger some. I'll handle what I can, swaying the men or presenting them with facts. At least we have Dennis Mallister as a potential ally. Jon gave a grim smile. This is the first time I've ever wanted to influence a vote. Wish me luck. They parted ways in the courtyard. Jon approached Ed and Gren, who were leaning against a wall. They updated Jon on the general mood among the men. Robb returned to his mother, finding her in the corner of the common yard with the great Jon, who scowled at every passing crow. Caitlin listened intently to Robb's report, her brow furrowed with deep worry. So it hinges on their choosing a Lord Commander who might be open to reason, she said. And we have limited time before Mance stirs from the Frostfangs. Robb sighed. Yes. And even if the Watch agrees, we must still find a way to bring the wildlings through. The Lords of the North will have something to say about that. The great Jon shifted his weight. Aye, they'll want the free folk kept out. Let them freeze beyond the wall, some might say. The great houses of the North have been bled already. The Karstarks lost men, the Umbers lost men, we all lost men. We're not keen on feeding thousands of wildlings. Caitlyn's lips pressed into a thin line. And yet we must or face a war on two fronts, wildlings and White Walkers. If Jon's claim can unify the realm, perhaps that unity can solve this. But it feels like an impossible knot. Nearby, Ramsay's mocking tone slipped in, some knots can only be cut with a knife. Robb cast him a cold glance. Your insight is appreciated, Bolton. But we need a more delicate approach. Caitlin turned to Robb. We have another matter to consider. The Boltons themselves and the Freys. You left Riverrun quickly, and Edmure has done his best, but Walder Frey was already seething at your choice to break your betrothal. Robb's heart sank. He recalled the oath he had sworn to Walder Frey in exchange for crossing the twins, an oath he had broken by marrying Talisa Mager in one version of events or Jane Westerling in another. But in this altered future, perhaps he had not married at all. The story did not clarify the piece. Still, tension with the Freys was likely. I never married a Frey, that much is certain. My father's death overshadowed too much, and we marched on King's Landing. Walder wanted my vow sealed. Then came the Ironborn invasion. War pulled me in too many directions. Caitlin lifted her chin. Frey's loyalty might be tenuous. Roose Bolton also concerns me. You saw how his bastard stares, how he listens. If the North does unite behind Jon, what does that mean for the Boltons? For the Freys, the Karstarks, the Glovers? We might be stepping into a nest of vipers. Robb pinched the bridge of his nose. One thing at a time. We have to resolve things here first, or there won't be a realm left to squabble over. Once the Watch has made its choice, we'll see if we can bring the wildlings through. Then we'll handle the Northern Lords. Even as he said it, the enormity of the tasks ahead weighed on him. The war, the wall, the White Walkers, the rightful throne. For days, Castle Black buzzed with rumors and tension. Brothers whispered of Jon Snow's wildling infiltration, the claim that he was a Targaryen, the question of letting thousands of savage free folk march through their gates. In the evenings, the men cast their votes for Lord Commander, scribbling names or tokens on scraps of parchment that were then tallied by stewards. It was a slow, contentious process. Jon, officially a brother, did not vote. He was considered under suspicion of desertion, so his opinion was deemed void. Robb and Catelyn mostly kept to themselves or conferred with Denys Mallister in private, giving counsel without intruding too heavily on the Watch's business. The Grey Jon found the entire affair tiresome, grumbling that kings and lords did not earn their power through scraps of paper. Ramsay simply watched, occasionally disappearing for hours at a time, returning with no explanation. Robb's instincts told him not to trust Bolton's bastard an inch, but for now he had bigger crises to manage. Jon spent every spare moment speaking with the brothers, explaining Corran's final command, recalling the threat he had seen among the free folk, giants, wargs, but also families who had no desire to fight. He hammered home the reality of the White Walkers. Some listened, some called him a liar, others simply shrugged. But crucially, he had the ear of men who had once served with him, men like PYP and Samwell Tarly, though Sam was missing, rumored to have gone beyond the wall with Mormont. Some of the rangers who survived the Fist were also supportive, having witnessed the horrors there. Finally, the results of the choosing were tallied. The Night's Watch gathered in the courtyard for the announcement. It was an overcast afternoon, the sky pale and cold, the wind dragging flurries of snow across the stones. A steward stood on a wooden platform, clearing his throat to project his voice. In the final count, Ser Denys Mallister received 209 votes. Ser Alliser Thorne received 180. Bowen Marsh received 74. Other names were scattered. Denys Mallister blinked, absorbing the news that he had the plurality. He stepped forward, mild surprise on his face. The steward continued, "In accordance with our custom, Ser Denys Mallister is hereby proclaimed the 999th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch." Alliser Thorne scowled, his fingers tightening on the pommel of his sword, but he did not protest openly. Bowen Marsh stood with lips parted, uncertain whether to congratulate Denys or lament his own failure. A low rumble of conversation passed through the watchers. Finally, Denys climbed the platform, raising both hands. "Brothers of the Night's Watch, we face our darkest hour. The next winter may be our last. I will do everything in my power to guide us wisely to keep you alive. We must stand united or we will fall divided." The men did not cheer. This was the Watch, after all, but they gave an approving nod or a respectful thump of weapons. In the crowd, Jon exhaled relief. Robb, at his side, squeezed his shoulder. Denys Mallister was by all accounts a fair man, one who recognized the seriousness of the threat. Perhaps there was hope. Soon after, Mallister summoned Jon, Robb, and Catelyn to the same modest council chamber where the stewards doled out bread and soup. Ramsay and the Great Jon also joined, though the Great Jon took up space near the door, arms folded, while Ramsay lounged at a bench with a half-smile. Denys Mallister sat at the head of a rough-hewn table wearing a heavy black cloak and a solemn expression. Alliser Thorne lingered behind him, silent but glowering. Once they were gathered, Mallister tapped his fingers on the tabletop. "Jon Snow, or shall I say Jon Targaryen? I have heard your story, though it remains difficult to believe. Nonetheless, times are dire, and I will not discard an advantage lightly. You claim to be able to negotiate with Mance Rayder. You claim that, if set free from your vows, you might unify the Southern Lords as well. Is that true?" Jon nodded. "I believe so. Robb has already pledged the North to me if I choose to press my claim. Or at least he's willing to do so. And if Mance Rayder can be swayed to come peacefully, we could avoid war at the Wall." Mallister glanced at Catelyn, then back to Jon. "Even if I free you from your vows, the rest of the Watch might not accept it. But as Lord Commander, I can decide your fate. The penalty for desertion is death. But if I believe you left on half-hands orders, then you're no deserter. And if I believe the realm's safety depends on your stepping outside the cloak, perhaps I can release you. But I must be sure of your intentions. You would do this for the Watch, for all of Westeros, and not simply to chase a crown." Jon's jaw tightened. "I don't even want the crown. But Robb convinced me that the throne may be the only key to forging the alliances we need. If I must break my vow to protect the realm from the White Walkers, I will." Catelyn spoke quietly. My son has reasoned this out carefully, Lord Commander. We do not seek a war for personal gain. We only want to unify the realm before winter devours us. If Jon's parentage can help achieve that, so be it. Dennis Mallister looked tired, though a firm resolve underpinned his voice. I agree. I will not see the wall destroyed because we cling to old ways in the face of extinction. Jon, kneel. He gestured for Jon to approach. Jon's heart pounded as he stepped forward. Mallister drew his sword, an old castle-forged blade with a raven's head pommel, and laid it across Jon's bowed shoulders. The Lord Commander's voice rang out in the hush. In recognition of your loyal service to the Night's Watch, of your infiltration at the behest of Qhorin Halfhand, and of the extraordinary circumstances that face this realm, I release you, Jon Snow, from your oath. You are no deserter. You are free to serve the realm as you see fit. He lifted the blade. Rise. Jon rose, trembling with conflicting emotions. The vow he had repeated on that moonlit night so long ago weighed on his spirit. Now it felt as if part of him had been cut away. The black cloak he wore seemed strangely alien, its significance undone by this pronouncement. Ser Alistair Thorne spoke up, voice dripping with scorn. The vow is for life. One man cannot simply break it. Mallister turned a hard stare on him. He breaks nothing. We set him free by the Lord Commander's authority, under the powers granted in times of realm-wide crisis. If you disagree, you can take it up with the White Walkers when they claw at your throat. A faint ripple of satisfaction went through Robb. Despite everything, it was done. Jon was free from the constraints that would have rendered him powerless to help. Now all that remained was to see if the realm would accept him, or tear itself apart trying to deny him. We have work to do, Mallister continued, sheathing his sword. First, you and Robb must attempt to treat with Mansraider, negotiate a passage. If he insists on violence, the Watch will defend the wall to the last man, but I pray it won't come to that. Meanwhile, we will send out ravens to gather any remaining strength we can from the Lords of the North, from beyond the seas. We must stand ready. Robb nodded. We'll ride for Mance's camp as soon as we can, but I have no doubt that Mance wants a peaceful crossing, provided he's assured it won't be a trap. Ser Alistair snorted. You plan to let thousands of wildlings simply wander into the north? Robb met his glare. Better that than wage a war that leaves us all vulnerable to the White Walkers. I'll do my best to rally northern lords, but it won't be easy. The stories they've heard of wildling raids go back generations. Mallister drummed his fingers on the table again. So be it. We'll try. And after that is settled, if it is... Jon, you must decide if you will push your claim for the throne. I do not presume to speak for the entire realm, but the Watch will not stand in your way if that is the path you choose. Jon nodded, though his thoughts were a whirlwind. He had no desire to plunge into the chaos of southern politics, but the memory of Mance's camp, the sight of children huddled by meager fires, and the echo of the threat beyond the wall forced him to see the bigger picture. If holding a crown meant saving them from ice and death, he would do it. They parted from Lord Commander Mallister. Once outside, Ramsay clapped slowly, a mocking gesture. How touching. The crow is now free. I suppose we'll start calling you your grace soon. Long may he reign and all that. Jon stiffened, but Robb shot Ramsay a warning look. Bolton, mind your words. This is a solemn day. Oh, I'm solemn indeed, Ramsay replied with a slick smile. So many changes, so many opportunities. I'm merely pondering how this will play out in the north, especially with my father so protective of the old ways. Robb's lips thinned. The mention of Roose Bolton sent a chill through him, even in the cold of Castle Black. Bolton's loyalty was questionable, and the cruelty of his bastard was legendary. You do as you're told, Robb said, voice low. We have enough enemies without turning on each other. The Grachan's glower underscored Robb's threat. Ramsay's smile never faltered, but he inclined his head in a parody of deference. Of course, my king. I live to serve. Jon turned away, uninterested in further barbs. He fixed his gaze on Robb. We should gather supplies and ride back to Mance as soon as possible. Every day we delay is a day closer to a wildling assault or a White Walker advance. Robb gave a resolute nod. Agreed. Let's speak to my mother. They found Caitlin in the library tower, a cramped chamber where the Black brothers kept records of the lands beyond the wall. Yellowed scrolls and thick ledgers cluttered the shelves, the air scented with old parchment and wax. She looked up from a table where she had been poring over a map with the Great John. The relief in her eyes at seeing them safe washed briefly over her features before she schooled it away. "Well?" she asked. John stepped forward, a flush in his cheeks. "Lord Commander Mallister has released me from my vows. I am free to aid the realm as I must." Caitlin folded her hands, exhaling. "Then it's done. I suppose we must plan our return to Mance Raider. I just hope he remains receptive." Robb bent over the map. "We'll take a small escort, just enough to show we come in good faith, not to threaten. The Great John can accompany us, perhaps half a dozen men. The rest will remain here to ensure no trouble arises." He glanced at Ramsay, who sauntered into the chamber behind them. Robb's jaw tightened. "You, Bolton, will remain at Castle Black. I want no misunderstandings with Mance." A flicker of annoyance crossed Ramsay's face, but he concealed it behind a shrug. "As you wish, my king." John nodded, appreciative that they were removing at least one wild card from the party. The Great John, overhearing, thumped his chest. "Count me in. I don't fear wildlings or giants." Caitlin's brow furrowed as she looked at the map. "Then I'll remain as well. I doubt my presence will smooth relations with the free folk. Bring Mance's terms back and we'll start drafting a formal agreement here." John and Robb shared a glance, remembering how prickly Ygritte had been about kneelers. Lady Stark's presence might indeed complicate matters. Still, John sensed her concern for him, even if she would never say it outright. He dipped his head in appreciation. Very well. They departed Castle Black the following morning with a biting wind at their backs. The sun struggled to pierce the gray sky, and the massive silhouette of the wall stood like a silent sentinel behind them. Their company was small. Robb, John, the Great John, and 7 Northmen loyal to House Stark. John felt a pang at leaving so soon after reuniting with a portion of his old life. But the realm was in crisis, and time was precious. The ride back to the wildling camp proved uneventful. A few crows circled overhead, and the air crackled with cold. They crossed the same ridges and valleys as before, guided by the memory of that great encampment. When they neared the area, John spotted smoke rising above the snow-laden hills. They drew up carefully, raising a white cloth on a spear. Before long, wildling outriders appeared. 2 men and a wiry girl, all armed with spears and wearing mismatched furs. One recognized John and spat on the ground. "Back again, Crow?" John met the man's hostility calmly. "I'm not a crow anymore. I've come to speak with Mance. We have news." The girl eyed the Great John and Robb suspiciously, but eventually jerked her head. "Come with us, but keep your hands away from your steel, or we'll cut them off." They were led back to Mance's tent at the heart of the encampment, which seemed even more crowded than before. Perhaps more free folk had gathered since their last visit. Women washed clothes in icy streams. Men sharpened axes or scraped hides. Older children helped with cooking fires. The vastness of the wildling host became clearer with every step. John's thoughts strayed to the question of how the Night's Watch intended to hold them off if negotiations failed. The bleak answer was that they couldn't, not without catastrophic losses. Mance Raider rose from his makeshift seat when they arrived, scanning their small band with a measuring gaze. Tormund Giantsbane was there as well, his broad face splitting into a grin at the sight of John. Ygritte lingered nearby, arms crossed, though her eyes flitted to John, relief mingling with annoyance at his leaving. "Well," Mance said, "you've returned more quickly than I expected. That means either the crows are bending or your negotiations failed and you're here to tell me we're all doomed. Which is it?" Robb took a half step forward. "Lord Commander Dennis Mallister has agreed to negotiate. He proposed a peaceful crossing if you vow not to raid our lands. We ask that your people remain in set regions until we can arrange for them to integrate or settle in lands further south. You will have to leave us hostages." Tormund let out a bark of laughter. "Hostages? You think us fools?" John spoke quickly, glancing at Tormund. "It's the only way the Northerners will trust your promise of peace. But if you do it, you'll spare thousands of lives. And you'll be safe from the others." Mance folded his arms. "Hostages are a steep demand. We're not kneelers. But if it's the only way, maybe we can find volunteers. Not me or Tormund, though. I doubt we'd last long as hostages." He considered, tapping his fingers against his elbow. "And you say the crows really mean to open the gates?" John nodded. "They're prepared, but it has to be done carefully. We can't simply march you all through at once. The wildlings are as many as the entire watch times 3 or 4. We need an orderly process." Mance's lips curved in a grim smile. "Orderly? That's not exactly how the free folk do things. But if it avoids a slaughter, maybe it's worth trying." "Very well, we'll talk details. But I've heard you're not a crow anymore. That's a story I'd like to hear." John exhaled. He explained briefly how the Watch had chosen a new Lord Commander, how they had accepted his infiltration was on Corrin's orders, and how he had been released from his vows under extraordinary circumstances. He did not immediately mention the Targaryen claim, unsure how Mance would react. Ygritte listened in stony silence, though relief flashed in her eyes at the news that John would not be executed as a deserter. Mance considered him for a moment. "So that's how it is. No black cloak, no vow. Just Jon Snow. Or Jon who is... What exactly? You told me you had new revelations about who you are." John glanced at Robb, who nodded encouragement. "It's true. I was raised a bastard, but I've learned I'm actually the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. It means I may have a claim on the Iron Throne in the south. If that claim can unify the realm against the White Walkers, I will use it." A moment of stunned silence followed. Tormund scratched his beard. "Another bloody king." He didn't sound impressed. "We've got one here already, you know." He jabbed a thumb at Mance, but then snorted. "Ah, well, good luck with that." Mance's expression flickered with something akin to amusement. "I never cared for thrones. But if your claim can help keep my people alive, who am I to argue?" "All right, Targaryen. Or Stark. Whichever you prefer. What next?" Robb spoke up. "We need to finalize terms with the Watch. Hostages, safe conduct, and orderly crossing, a place for your people to settle. Once that is done, I'll bring word to the Northern Lords to prepare them." A sigh escaped Mance's lips. "That's a lot of talk, and talk sometimes fails. But if we're going to avoid war, I'll do my part. Let's settle the details." He gestured at a crude table set up in his tent. They spent hours hashing out a rough framework. The free folk would approach in groups, each group accompanied by a member of the Watch, crossing at Castle Black under the watchful eyes of the Black brothers. Once through, they'd be temporarily settled in the Gift, the lands just south of the Wall historically donated to the Watch, but many of those lands lay fallow. It would be a challenge, but far better than slaughter on the ice. Mance agreed to send a handful of trusted men, and possibly a few women of note, to remain at Castle Black as guests. The Watch would do the same for a handful of rangers. Everyone recognized it as a careful dance around the concept of hostages. The great Jon mostly remained silent, arms folded, brow furrowed at the idea of letting so many wildlings cross the border. But he did not raise a direct objection. He trusted Robb so far. Jon, for his part, took comfort in Ygritte's presence, though she spoke little. He caught the conflicted look in her eyes whenever the idea of kneeling or hostages was raised. She believed in freedom as fiercely as she believed in breathing, and the notion of forging oaths with kneelers grated on her. Yet the fear of the others forced her to consider alliances once unimaginable. By dusk, they had the outline of a pact. Mance would gather his people, instruct them on how to proceed to the Wall in an orderly fashion. Jon and Robb would ride back to Castle Black to confirm the Watch's acceptance of the conditions. Then, piece by piece, thousands of free folk would begin crossing. If any attacked or raided, the Watch would deal with them harshly, but Mance vowed to keep them in check. When the final words were spoken, Mance leaned back, exhaustion on his face. "This might be the strangest day of my life. Crows and free folk forging treaties. A Targaryen in black furs. The others truly are the only enemy that matters, aren't they?" Jon nodded gravely. "They are. We can't defeat them if we keep turning on each other." Mance drummed his fingers. "So be it. Tomorrow, I'll announce to the camps that we'll begin the march south soon. If the crows keep their promises, we'll keep ours." He glanced at Robb, a flicker of challenge in his eyes. "But see to it your mother and your lords don't slam the door in our faces. If they do, we'll have no choice but to break it down." Robb met his gaze evenly. "I'll do my best. You have my word." The men parted, stepping out into the open. Dusk was falling, painting the snow in purple shadows. Fires glowed in the wildling camp, sending sparks into the wind. Jon lingered by Ygritte's side for a moment. She studied him with those fierce, gray eyes. "You truly might be a king?" she asked, voice hushed. "A dragon king?" Jon shook his head slowly. I don't feel like one. I'm just me. But if wearing that crown means I can save your people and my people from the others, then I'll do it. Ygritte gave a mirthless laugh. You're half a fool, Jon Snow. She touched his cheek gently, then withdrew her hand. Come back once this is done. We might not stay in these camps for long. He nodded, heart twisting with the realization that they might soon walk completely separate paths. I will return. I promise. They parted, and Jon joined Robb and the Great Jon as they mounted their horses for the trek back to Castle Black. The hour was late, but they needed to deliver the news quickly. Snow began to fall in heavier flakes as they rode, the wind rising. Darkness swallowed the terrain, but the Greychon's booming curses and the sure-footedness of their mounts kept them from losing their way. They arrived in the early hours before dawn. Jon's muscles were stiff with cold as they passed beneath the wall's looming shadow. The sentries at the gate let them in with mutters of surprise, and soon they were huddled around a fire in Castle Black's main hall, rubbing feeling back into their fingers. When they spoke with Lord Commander Mallister, he looked grave but resigned. It's better than war. I'll speak with the men, but we must be vigilant. The gift can't support that many people. We'll need supplies from the north. Robb grimaced. I'll ride to Winterfell soon, gather what lords I can, and send word to the rest. The harvest in the north is scarce, but maybe we can manage enough for the wildlings to survive. If not, we'll face chaos. Mallister drummed his fingertips on the table. Chaos is coming either way. Let's at least face it with a plan. They parted to snatch a few hours of rest. Jon, slipping back into a small bedchamber, felt a wave of exhaustion roll over him. The events of the last days had been a blur, discovering he was free of his vow, forging a truce with Mance, and acknowledging a claim that could shake the Seven Kingdoms. He fell into a fitful sleep, haunted by images of a swirling snowstorm filled with icy blue eyes. By mid-morning, they convened again, this time with Catelyn present. Robb, red-eyed from insufficient rest, laid out the next steps. Mother, I must go to Winterfell. Jon will remain here for a short while to oversee the first groups of wildlings crossing. He knows Mance's people best and can quell misunderstandings. Once the process is started, he'll ride south and meet me at Winterfell. Then, we consider the question of the throne. Jon nodded. I'll do what I can. The wildlings will trust me more than any other crow. Catelyn's eyes flicked over the two of them. And you truly mean to press the claim? That means facing the Lannisters, Stannis, and possibly Daenerys Targaryen if the rumors of her survival are true. Jon's gaze lowered. He had heard the whispers of the exiled princess with 3 dragons. What that meant for his claim was uncertain. I'm not eager to claim a seat that might belong to her. But from what we know, she's across the narrow sea building an army. We cannot wait while the White Walkers mass. If she returns and we can form an alliance, all the better. But we can't stand idle. Robb touched Jon's arm. We'll figure it out. Let's save the realm first. We'll worry about the details of lineage and dragons if and when that confrontation comes. Catelyn closed her eyes briefly, remembering the wars and tragedy that had shaped her life. Let us pray we can avoid further bloodshed. It was decided. By noon, Robb, along with the Great Jon and half their escort, rode south with Catelyn toward Winterfell. Ramsay, to Robb's dismay, insisted on accompanying them. He claimed a desire to report back to Roose Bolton and see to any repairs in Winterfell, but Robb suspected more sinister motives. Still, refusing him openly might spark an internal feud, and they needed every sword united if the White Walkers were coming. The tension in Robb's shoulders mounted as they departed. Jon stood at the gates of Castle Black, watching them ride away through the swirling snow, his heart a mixture of apprehension and determination. He had parted from Robb with a firm embrace, both remembering the simpler days when they were boys exploring Winterfell's Godwood. So much had changed, and more change was coming. Once the party vanished into the distance, Jon turned toward the courtyard, where the Black brothers stirred in uneasy anticipation. Mallister had already begun briefing the men on the plan for the wildling crossing, and Alliser Thorne's sour expression promised trouble. Jon inhaled the biting air, bracing himself. He had broken free of one vow, only to take on a burden that felt heavier than any black cloak. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt aligned with purpose, to save the living, whether they wore furs or steel, small clothes or crowns. Days passed, each one a delicate dance of trust. The first group of wildlings approached the wall under a white flag, led by an older man named Dalla's father. Jon was only vaguely aware of their families, but recognized them as non-combatants. The gates opened, watchers stood with arrows nocked in case of treachery, and the group filed through, eyes wide at the sheer scale of the wall from the side. Ser Dennis Mallister was there, face stern but not unkind. The wildlings were ushered into the gift assigned to a series of barns and hovels the watch had hastily cleaned out. Food was meager but enough to keep them alive. John oversaw the process, accompanied by Ed, Gren, and a handful of men who trusted him. He spoke with the wildlings in quiet tones, reassuring them that they would not be slaughtered once inside. In turn, he warned them that any raids or attacks would not be tolerated. Tormund Giantsbane arrived with a later group, jostling and joking with the guards, calling them stiff-collared kneelers. Yet he seemed genuinely relieved no blood was spilled. The system was far from perfect. Tensions flared whenever a wildling recognized a crow who had once killed a friend, or a black brother spotted a raider who had once burned a northern village. But John and Tormund worked tirelessly to calm arguments before they became violence. Mal Lister, witnessing the uneasy truce, took what steps he could to contain friction. Alistair Thorne seethed at the infiltration of savages, but had no authority to stop it. Word soon spread that the crossing was happening, and more wildlings trickled to Mance's camp each day, streaming south to the wall in a ragged procession. John heard rumors that some free folk refused the new arrangement, preferring to remain in the wilderness and take their chances. They might cause trouble in the future. For now, though, the main body of Mance's people complied, spurred by fear of the White Walkers. As the flow of wildlings continued, John found himself in constant motion, settling disputes, checking supplies, comforting families, all with an underlying urgency. He had no illusions that all the wildlings would obey Mance indefinitely, but this lull might buy them time to prepare for the real enemy. Sometimes he caught Ygritte's eye among the crowds, and they would share a brief moment of warmth, but neither had the leisure for anything more. Between these duties, John brooded on what lay ahead for Robb and the North. Would the Northern Lords accept a wave of wildlings settling on their doorstep? Would they support John's claim? Or would they side with the Boltons or the Freys, fracturing the North further? He had grown up hearing tales of House Bolton's cruelty. Trusting them was a fool's errand. Yet Robb seemed determined to hold the North together despite the tensions. Late one afternoon, after seeing another group safely through, John stood near the wall's northern gate, the air crisp and still. Ed approached, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Remind me never to complain about latrine duty again. At least there, the only stink is from, well, you know. Here, we have wildlings and crows glaring at each other like arch-rivals. John mustered a tired smile. We're making progress. A few fights, but fewer than I expected. Tormund said more will come in the next days. Then Mance himself. Ed sighed. We'll need more supplies, or we'll all starve. The Night's Watch was barely scraping by before. Now we have thousands more mouths to feed. John's stomach twisted. Robb's riding to Winterfell. Maybe the Northern Lords can help. Ed gave a humorless chuckle. Let's hope so, or else we'll be living on snow and bark. They parted as the wind picked up, howling across the ice. John rubbed at his forehead, aware of how precarious everything was. If the North wouldn't provide, if the White Walkers surged south, if internal feuds erupted, any one of those variables could doom them. But a small flame of hope kept him going. He had seen enemies work together before, had seen honorable men choose mercy over vengeance. If enough people chose cooperation, perhaps they could withstand the storm. That night, he settled down for a brief rest in the same small cell-like room he'd used as a sworn brother. Sleep stole over him in fits. His dreams churned with half-formed images, a dragon's roar echoing in the crypts of Winterfell, a flock of ravens swirling against a blood-red sky, the gleam of a crown made of ice, the hush of falling snow. When he woke, sweat slicked his brow and he felt a momentary panic that he'd missed something crucial. But all was still, save for the soft snoring of men in the adjacent hallway. Each day, more groups arrived, each day tensions simmered, each day ended with no major bloodshed. An unlikely miracle, though how long it would last was anyone's guess. Tormund frequently tried to keep morale high by telling bawdy jokes or leading rowdy songs, though the Black brothers mostly glowered at him. Ygritte helped as well, forming a small band of spear wives to keep peace among their own. John marveled at how quickly she took on that responsibility. It reminded him of the fierce pride she carried in every step, the same pride that drew him to her. Finally, more than a fortnight after Robb's departure, Mance Rayder himself arrived, accompanied by his wife, Dalla, and a large retinue of followers. His presence signaled that the bulk of the free folk had committed to crossing. By then, thousands were already south of the wall, scattered in rudimentary encampments throughout the gift, many complaining about meager rations and harsh discipline from the watch. But at least they were alive, not waiting in the biting cold for the others. Lord Commander Mallister, gone from stress and lack of sleep, greeted Mance with forced civility. Mance responded with a faint smirk, but the two men managed a semblance of cordial conversation. "We'll get everyone through eventually," Mallister said, voice weary. "But you must keep them orderly. If we have riots for bread, no one will be fed." Mance nodded. "I understand. But these are free folk. They don't line up nicely like Southerners might. We'll do our best." John saw the lines of worry etched into Mallister's face. He wished Robb had returned or that some reassuring word from the north had arrived. Ravens had been sent, but no replies. A cold fear gnawed at his mind. Had something happened to Robb? Tom stretched on. More wildlings crossed, and Castle Black became a crowded hub of unlikely cooperation, with Black brothers instructing free folk to set up temporary huts, build fire pits, or ration food. Mance often walked among his people, calming disputes. Ygritte found reasons to seek John out, sometimes with questions from the spear wives, other times just to stand near him in the fleeting quiet. Their relationship was a fragile thing in this new environment, but every glance they shared said what they couldn't put into words. They needed each other's strength. One evening, as the sun died behind the wall's icy crest, John stood alone near the open gate, arms folded. His breath plumed in the chill air. The track leading north was lit by torches thrust into the snow, flickering in the gathering dark. Suddenly, he heard hoofbeats. At first, he assumed more wildlings were arriving, but a prickle of intuition made him step forward. The figure that emerged was a messenger, riding hard, wearing northern livery. The man stumbled from his horse, half-frozen, and nearly collapsed at John's feet. "Jon Snow," he gasped. "A message from Winterfell, urgent." He fumbled in his cloak and thrust a damp scroll at John. Then he slumped, half-conscious from exhaustion. A few Black brothers hurried forward to tend him, carrying him inside. John stood under the torchlight, heart pounding, staring at the scroll sealed with the Stark direwolf. He broke the seal with trembling fingers, eyes flicking rapidly over the words. The message was short and clipped, as if written in haste. His blood ran cold as he read, "John, return at once. The north fractures under old grudges and new betrayals. A storm of knives gathers. We need your presence to secure the lords before it's too late. I fear dark plots are in motion and I cannot hold them all at bay. Ride south with all speed. The realm's fate depends on it." Robb, anger and dread warred within John. He handed the scroll to Mallister, who read it in grim silence. "It seems your brother cannot quell the storm alone. With the wildlings crossing, you've done your part here. Perhaps you must do your part in the north now." Mance, drawn by the commotion, heard the words. "If a war breaks out in the north, does that mean your promise to let us cross is undone?" John shook his head fiercely. "No. Lord Commander Mallister stands by it. And so do I. I'll do what I can to ensure it remains. But I must go to Winterfell." Mallister placed a hand on John's shoulder. "Go then. We'll keep honoring the treaty. But hurry, if House Stark falls. The rest of the realm may follow." Ygritte stepped close, worry in her eyes. "You're leaving?" John looked at her, torn. "I have to. My brother needs me. The North needs me." She nodded, though sorrow brimmed in her features. "Will you come back?" "Yes. If we can secure the North, we'll march south again. The White Walkers are still out there. We have to be ready." Tormund sidled up, crossing his arms. "Well, if you're off to wrangle your fancy southern lords, good luck. We'll keep these kneelers in line here." He gave a wide grin. "Or maybe they'll keep us in line." John forced a ghost of a smile in return. He hurried to gather what supplies he needed, selecting a sturdy horse and a small retinue. 2 or 3 Black brothers volunteered to go with him, but he refused. Castle Black needed every able man. Instead, he asked for a single guide, a ranger who knew the roads south of the wall. Within an hour, he was in the saddle, cloak wrapped tight, bidding farewell to Mance, Tormund, Ygritte, and the others. He rode into the dark with a torch raised, the ranger by his side. The wind gusted, blowing snow across the path, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. In his chest, John felt a desperate urgency. Robb's letter spoke of betrayal and looming danger. The memory of the Boltons, the Freys, the Karstarks came to mind, each with their own grievances. If the North tore itself apart, everything they'd built here at the Wall would be for nothing. The White Walkers would sweep through unopposed. Before dawn, they reached the holdfast where they rested briefly, then pressed on. Day after day, they traveled down the King's Road, passing through small villages that had seen better times. Food was scarce, houses boarded up against the cold. Some folk recognized the stark sigil Jon wore and asked for news. He had little comfort to give them, only that if they held out, the worst might be averted. When they neared the neck, they found it in partial flood, with the Crannogman watchers eyeing them from swampy vantage points. Jon used the token Robb had given him, a small badge of House Reed, to secure safe passage. Howland Reed did not appear in person, but his folk guided Jon around the pitfalls of the bog. Eventually, the ground grew firmer again, and they emerged into the north proper. Ravens soared overhead in the bitter sky. The wind carried a hint of dread, as if the land itself sensed impending turmoil. Jon saw small columns of smoke rising in the distance now and again, signs of skirmishes or burned holdfasts. Everywhere, fear haunted the eyes of the peasants. At last, they approached Winterfell. Jon felt a pang of homecoming despite everything. The familiar walls, partially repaired from the ruin inflicted by Theon Greyjoy, stood against the bleak horizon. Stark banners fluttered from ramparts, joined by a few others, the umber sigil of the giant, the Manderly Merman, and the flayed man of House Bolton. Jon's heart tightened with suspicion at that last. Why was Bolton's banner so prominent? The guards at the gate recognized the ranger's black cloak and Jon's own stark features. They allowed him entry, though he noticed their guarded expressions. Inside the courtyard, he saw new wooden scaffolding where repairs continued. Men in northern colors sparred half-heartedly, their faces grim. Stable hands took Jon's horse, whispering among themselves. Jon asked for Robb. A guard directed him to the great hall, which still bore the scars of burning. Jon marched down the corridors, heart pounding, recalling a time when he'd roamed these halls as a boy, always acutely aware of his bastard status. Now he walked them as the recognized son of Lyanna Stark, the nephew of Eddard, possibly heir to the Iron Throne. Felt surreal. He found Robb standing near the dais, speaking in a low, urgent tone with several northern lords. Galbar Glover, Lady Barbary Dustin, Lord Wyman Manderly, and the great Jon. Catelyn was nowhere in sight. As Jon entered, Robb glanced up, relief flooding his face. He excused himself from the group and crossed the hall with swift strides, embracing Jon in a tight, quick hug. "You came?" Robb breathed, stepping back. "Gods be good, I was starting to worry." Jon frowned. "Your raven said the north was in chaos. What's happening?" Robb's jaw clenched. "It's Bolton." And the phrase, "We have enemies within our own walls, sowing discord. We have rumors that Walder Frey is mustering men at the Twins, refusing to answer my summons unless I yield up certain pledges. The Boltons have demanded more influence in the region, citing the restoration of Winterfell as a cause. There are whispers that the Karstarks might break away entirely in retribution for my jailing Lord Rickard Karstark after he disobeyed me in the war. And to make it worse, rumors swirl that I plan to kneel to a Targaryen or become one. My own bannermen are uncertain. Some of them want me to remain the king in the north, separate from the Iron Throne. Others want to see if you'll truly claim it." He shook his head in frustration. "They're pulling in every direction." Jon's eyes narrowed. "Ramsay said he was returning here with you to do repairs. Where's he now?" Robb's lips thinned. "He's around, stirring trouble. He tries to charm me with talk of loyalty, but half my men do not trust him. And rumors swirl that Roose Bolton marches from the Drevfort with reinforcements to protect me, so he says. I fear a trap. The Boltons are known for cunning and cruelty. If they sense weakness, they'll strike." Jon stiffened. "And you think they might betray us outright?" Robb nodded grimly. "I can't be sure. But the flayed man flying in my courtyard is a sign that Roose is asserting himself. The freedmen saw it as a pledge of support for House Stark, but I see it as a territorial claim. The man is subtle, but not that subtle. He's vying for power." Jon inhaled. "So what's our next move?" Robb glanced at the small group of lords conferring by the dais. "We've been negotiating, trying to hold them together until we can form a united stance. Some want me to bend the knee to you if you press your claim as a Targaryen. Others say that would betray the memory of our father. The truth is, we don't have time for all these arguments. The White Walkers loom and the Lannisters are still out there." Jon's stomach churned. He realized that convincing an entire kingdom to rally behind him was far more complicated than forging a single peace with Mance Rayder. "Then we must show them we stand together. If I declare my intention to protect the North's sovereignty, promise them that as king, I'll respect the North's traditions, they might come around. Yes, Robb agreed. But the Boltons, you know their reputation. If we're not careful, they'll undermine us. And the phrase hold the twins, the key crossing over the Green Fork. If Walder sides with the Boltons, we'll have a pincer. For now, we have House Manderley, House Glover, House Umber, but the Karstarks are uncertain, the Boltons are precarious, the Riswells and Dustons follow their own intrigues in the Bar Rowlands. Jon swallowed. Have you called a great council of the Northern Lords? Robb ran a hand through his auburn hair. I have. They're trickling in. That's why I needed you. If you're not here to speak for your claim, rumors will run wild. We'll gather them in a few days and try to unify them behind the plan. The threat beyond the wall is real, we must muster our strength, and we might need to lead the entire realm. If we fail, the North could tear itself apart. Jon blew out a breath. All right, I'm with you. But I need to be honest, my claim might threaten them. The mere word Targaryen stirs old hatred. The North fought valiantly against the Targaryens during Robert's rebellion. Some will never forgive. Robb nodded. Then we show them who you are. You're not the Mad King, you're not Rhaegar. You're a Stark in your heart. If they can see that, maybe they'll accept it. Jon placed a hand on Longclaw's pommel. He wore the Valyrian steel blade that Jeor Mormont had gifted him. The wolf's head pommel glinted in the torchlight as if reminding him of the bond he held with the North. Then let's prepare. We'll talk to each lord, gather them in assembly, and lay out the truth. Robb clapped Jon's shoulder. Aye. And let's pray the Boltons don't strike before we can bring them to heel. Their footsteps echoed on the stone as they moved toward the dais to rejoin the gathering lords. Jon felt the eyes of Glover, Dustin, Manderley, and Umber upon him, each sizing him up. He inclined his head respectfully, acknowledging their station. Lady Dustin's expression was guarded, her lips thin. Lord Wyman Manderley offered a polite nod, though he seemed more interested in the possibility of trade routes reopening than anything else. Galbar Glover eyed Jon like a curious puzzle. The great Jon, who had parted from Robb earlier, returned with them, throwing Jon a hearty greeting. Before any conversation could begin in earnest, a side door banged open and Ramsay Bolton strode in, wearing a smirk as though he owned the hall. He made a show of bowing. Ah, the famed Jon Snow returned at last. Or should I say, Targaryen? We've heard so many wonderful tales. Jon forced a calm expression, though his hand tightened on Longclaw's hilt. Bolton. Ramsay glanced at the other lords, that unsettling grin never leaving his lips. I bring a message from my father. He nears Winterfell with a sizable force, perhaps 3,000 men. He hopes we'll have good tidings to share on his arrival. His eyes flicked to Robb. He also wonders if the king in the north will soon decide on alliances. One can't dangle the prospect of unity forever without delivering. Robb inhaled slowly. Your father is welcome to come. We'll discuss matters at the Great Council. That is all. Ramsay's eyes glinted. Indeed. I look forward to seeing all the fine lords gather and chat. So civilized. So trusting. He bowed again, then glided away, leaving a poisonous hush in his wake. The tension in the hall felt taut as a drawn bowstring. Jon's mind raced. 3,000 Bolton men? That was a formidable force, especially if combined with a faction of the Karstarks or the Freys. If it came to open conflict, the Starks might be overwhelmed. The memory of the red wedding from the original history flickered in Jon's mind, though in this altered timeline, no wedding had sealed or broken alliances in quite the same way. Still, the sense of impending treachery was no less potent. He and Robb exchanged a meaningful look. They would have to navigate this with utmost care, or the North would drown in blood. And if the North fell, what hope did the rest of Westeros have against the White Walkers? Thus began a tense, uneasy vigil as the days crept by and more lords arrived. The loyal men and women of House Mormont came, Midge Mormont leading with a stern nod, though she had few warriors left. The Serwans and Tallhearts arrived in smaller numbers. Even a delegation from House Reed appeared, a quiet pair of Crannogmen bearing Howland Reed's greetings. Each day, the courtyard filled with new banners, new stabled horses, new whispered intrigues. Jon spent many hours in conference with Robb and Catelyn, updating them on the Wildlings crossing and receiving second-hand news of the South. Supposedly, Joffrey Baratheon, Joffrey Lannister, truly still held the Iron Throne, though rumors said that King's Landing was rife with unrest. Stannis remained at Dragonstone, licking his wounds after the failed assault on Blackwater Bay. Renly was dead. The Tyrells had allied with the Lannisters. Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to be in Slaver's Bay, conquering cities with her dragons. The war had ground on so long that people no longer remembered how it felt to live in peace. Finally, word came that Roose Bolton had been sighted, his men encamped a few miles from Winterfell. He did not come in at once, likely letting the tension simmer. Another day passed before he arrived, leading a column of battle-hardened Dreadfort soldiers into the courtyard. Their banners flayed men clashed against the gray walls, an ominous sight. Ramsay greeted them with a slow, creeping smile, guiding them inside. Jon and Robb stood on the steps to the Great Hall, flanked by the Great Jon and a retinue of Stark guards in cloaks. The air crackled with unspoken menace as Roose Bolton dismounted, slender and pale, his quiet demeanor more dangerous than any open threat. His eyes flickered to Jon, then to Robb, a polite curve to his lips that never touched his gaze. "Your Grace," Bolton said softly to Robb. "And Jon Snow, is it?" Jon returned a curt nod. "Or Targaryen, yes. The name matters less than the purpose." Bolton's lips twitched. "Indeed." He turned to Robb. "I understand you've called a great council, my lord, to decide the future of the North. Shall we proceed, then?" The phrase weighed as well, though I hear they're delayed on the road. Robb mustered all the regal bearing he had learned in his short tenure as king in the North. "Yes. Let us proceed. Come inside." So they filed into the great hall, which was lit by rows of torches and set with long tables. Lords and their retinues found seats while Stark guards lined the walls. Ramsay slithered in behind his father, wearing the same smug expression. Jon took a seat beside Robb at the head of the hall, mindful of the eyes on him. Catelyn sat close by, a quiet pillar of support. The Great Jon was on Robb's other side, watchful. The tension in the air was nearly suffocating. Robb stood, calling for order. The assembled lords fell silent. He surveyed them, Manderley, Glover, Mormont, Serwyn, Dustin, Ryswell, Bolton, Reed's delegation, lesser bannermen. "Lords and ladies of the North," he began, voice echoing in the scarred hall. "We stand at a crossroads. The war with the South continues, but we have greater threats. Beyond the wall, the White Walkers stir. The free folk have crossed into the North. We must decide our path or be consumed by the darkness." A few mutters rose at the mention of wildlings crossing. Bolton remained still. Robb continued, "I have spoken with the Night's Watch, who confirmed that the threat of whites and White Walkers is real. We have allied with the free folk to stand against this enemy. That is not all. My brother, once thought my father's bastard, has been revealed as Jon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark. He has a claim on the Iron Throne if we choose to press it. But first, we must unite here in the North. The question is simple: will we stand together, or will we fall divided?" A heavy silence followed. Then Lady Meage Mormont rose, her voice gruff. "I follow House Stark. If you say these White Walkers are real, I believe you. My blade stands ready to defend the North from wildlings or others or Lannisters. If you vouch for Jon Targaryen, I'll hear him out." Lord Glover nodded. "House Glover has always stood with the Starks. If there's proof that Jon is Lyanna's son, he deserves consideration. But is that cause enough for the North to bend a knee again to a southern throne?" Jon cleared his throat. "If I claim the throne, I'll not force the North to bend. I'll let you govern yourselves as you see fit. The key is unity, to rally the other kingdoms so we can all face the threat of the White Walkers." Lord Wyman Manderley stroked his many chins. "A Targaryen who would let the North rule itself? That's a novel notion. Might open trade, though, if the war ends." He shrugged. "I'll not oppose if it ends the bloodshed." Barbary Dustin stood cold-eyed. "The Targaryens burned Harrenhal with dragon fire. They forced kings to kneel. My ancestors died in those wars. Why should we trust you not to do the same?" Jon met her stare, voice steady. "Because I'm half Stark. Because I was raised among you, believed myself Ned Stark's son. I carry the Targaryen name only by blood. I have no interest in being a tyrant." A low murmur of grudging acceptance rippled among some. Roose Bolton rose slowly, quieting the hall with his presence. "This is all very interesting. But the North has crowned Robb Stark as its king. Do we now discard that and bow to this new Targaryen? Where's our pride?" Robb's jaw tightened. "I have said from the start that I never wanted a crown. I wanted justice for my father and safety for the North. If Jon can offer the realm unity, I support him." Bolton tilted his head. "So you would set aside your crown? That might leave some of us uneasy. After all, the North bled to secure your kingship." Jon sensed the undercurrent of challenge in Bolton's words. The man was testing how far Robb would go to disclaim or defend his position. Some lords might prefer to remain independent, others might prefer to rejoin a Targaryen-led realm. Seeds of division had been sown. The Great Jon spoke up, voice booming. "We named Robb king in the North after Ned Stark was murdered. But I'll not refuse to hear reason if Robb says this lad, Jon, can unite the realm. We want the Lannisters cast down, we want safety from the others. If your vow is to keep the North free, well, maybe we can talk." Bolton's gaze flicked between Robb and Jon. Yes, maybe we can, he murmured softly. But we also face the question of the phrase. Walder Frey wants restitution for slights done to him. He might block our southern path if we do not appease him. He might even ally with the Lannisters. His thin smile reeked of intrigue. And what if House Bolton has its own thoughts on the future? Should we not be heard? Robb's temper flared. Speak plainly, Lord Bolton. Bolton offered a ghost of a bow. Plainly then. If the North is to follow a Targaryen, we must have guarantees. Land, rights, recognition. The Dreadfort has served House Stark for centuries, but we are not without power. We have needs as well. A hush fell. The demands were clear, the threat implied. Jon forced himself to remain calm. As king, if that's what I become, I'll ensure all lords who stand with us receive fair treatment. But I won't carve up the North to bribes. Bolton's eyes were inscrutable. Of course not. We only asked for what we are owed. A voice from the back of the hall cut in, or you take it by force, is that it? Heads turned to see one of the Umber men glowering at Bolton. Some chuckled darkly, others winced. Ramsay raised an eyebrow in mild amusement. Roose Bolton smoothed his tunic. I have no desire for a fight if we can find a civilized resolution. Tension crackled. Robb inhaled, pressing forward. Then let us find that resolution. We must commit to forging unity under the banner of House Stark and House Targaryen. If any house refuses and chooses to stand alone, they do so at their peril, for the others come for us all. Will you stand with us, Bolton? Bolton let the silence stretch. Finally, he inclined his head. I shall consider. If you guarantee House Bolton's place in the new order. Jon's heart pounded, realizing that an immediate, wholehearted oath would have been too much to hope for. But at least Bolton didn't declare outright rebellion. The rest of the assembly gave similar conditional support. The Manderleys and Glovers seemed more open, the Dustons more wary. The Reeds, by their Crannogmen proxy, simply stated they would follow the Starks. The Karstarks had not arrived yet, another worrying sign. Thus ended the first gathering in uneasy truce, promises of further negotiation. Over the following days, smaller councils met, discussing specifics, how the North would remain largely self-governed under Jon Targaryen, how each house would be recognized for its loyalty, how to handle the White Walker threat. Bolton and Ramsay floated through these councils like pale shadows, sowing little seeds of fear and distrust. Robb worked tirelessly to keep the coalition intact, while Jon tried to reassure the lords of his Stark loyalties. Little by little, a fragile consensus began to emerge. Most were willing to unite behind Jon if the alternatives were continued war with the Lannisters or isolation against the others. They wanted official recognition that the North would have wide autonomy, something akin to the arrangement the Targaryens once allowed Dorne. In principle, Jon was ready to grant that. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Reports came of Karstark skirmishes with loyalists near the last river. A Frey scouting party was sighted close to Moat Cailin, presumably seeking to block the route south. Time ticked away, each day bringing the others closer. The assembled lords demanded a final pronouncement. Would Jon formally claim the Iron Throne? Would he demand oaths? Finally, Robb and Jon decided the moment had come. They called the lords to the Great Hall again, determined to settle the matter. Winterfell's main keep still showed the scars of the Ironborn, but enough had been repaired to host a somber ceremony. Torches lined the walls, and a dais was set with the ancient high seat of House Stark. Robb, dressed in stark gray with a direwolf sigil pinned to his cloak, stood behind the seat. Jon wore simpler garb, dark wool with a faint Targaryen red sash, an intentional mix of both houses. The lords and ladies filed in, ringed by anxious retainers. Bolton was near the front, expression unreadable. Ramsay lounged beside him, feigning disinterest. Lady Meage Mormont stood straight-backed, her daughters behind her. Manderley arrived late, breathing heavily as he took his place. No Karstarks. The door closed. Robb's voice rang out. Lords of the North, I have served as your king since you raised me after my father's unjust death. I have bled with you on the battlefield. I have tried to keep the North safe. But now we stand on the brink of greater perils. White Walkers in the north, the Lannisters in the south. We must unite with the rest of the realm. My brother Jon, rightful son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, stands ready to lead if you will have him. He turned to Jon, stepping aside so that Jon could ascend the dais. Heart pounding, Jon stepped forward, looking out at the sea of faces. I was raised as Jon Snow. I believed myself a bastard. Only recently did I learn the truth. My father, my true father, was Rhaegar Targaryen. But I was raised in Winterfell by Eddard Stark, among the people of the North. I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as a man who loves this land and wishes to protect it. If claiming the Iron Throne helps us gather the armies we need to defeat the White Walkers and restore peace, then I will take that burden. But I swear this, the North shall remain free to govern itself. You will not be mere vassals to a distant king. You will be my allies, my friends, my people. A hush stretched. Then Midge Mormont slammed her fist to her breast. I believe in House Stark. If Jon Targaryen is half Stark, that's enough for me. I'll follow. The great Jon roared. Then so will House Umber. The king in the north is my rightful liege, but if he passes that crown to his brother, that's good enough for me, provided the north remains free of southern meddling. Others murmured agreement. Lord Glover hesitated but gave a tight nod. If it ends this war, so be it. Lord Wyman Manderley let out a theatrical sigh. I suppose White Harbor can abide a Targaryen, as long as trade thrives and the Lannisters are cast down. A cautious wave of applause and agreement filled the hall. Barbary Dustin rose stiffly, gave a curt nod, and said, I'll hold you to your word, boy. The tide was turning in Jon's favor, until Roose Bolton spoke, quiet and measured. This all sounds quite appealing, does it not? Yet let us not forget that the Freys are at our doorstep, that Karstark men roam the countryside in rebellion. We have not heard how Jon Targaryen or Robb Stark intend to secure the peace. Words are wind. Power is real. Jon's frustration flared. We'll deal with the Freys. We'll negotiate if we can, or fight if we must. As for Karstark, I'm sure we can speak sense to them if they come. Otherwise, we'll defend ourselves. Bolton's lips curved. Fight or speak sense? Very well. But how do we know you won't sell the North's lifeblood to the dragons the moment you find them across the sea? Jon shook his head. If Daenerys Targaryen truly lives, I would ally with her if it means more strength against the White Walkers. But I will not hand over the North to anyone. You have my oath. A momentary silence. Then Bolton bowed, shallow but unmistakable. Then House Bolton stands with you. He straightened, eyes glittering. Long may you reign. A sense of relief coursed through the assembly. Slowly, voices rose in hesitant unity, pledging themselves to Jon Targaryen. Robb, standing behind the seat, let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Jon turned, meeting Robb's gaze. In that moment, the illusions of crowns and claims fell away, replaced by the bond of two men who had grown up as brothers, determined to save the land they loved. Applause and cheers, subdued but real, echoed in the great hall. Jon took it in, feeling the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. The North was on the path to uniting behind him, with conditions of autonomy. Next would come the matter of taming the Freys, dealing with the Karstarks, forging alliances with other kingdoms, contending with the White Walkers, and perhaps even facing Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. The road ahead was long and perilous. As the lords bowed or gave nods of acknowledgement, Ramsay's face caught Jon's eye. A twisted half-smile that hinted at secrets left unsaid. Roose Bolton stood at his side, equally composed. Jon knew better than to assume their support meant trust. Still, for now, the hall rang with a single voice. An acceptance of Jon Targaryen as the rightful king, the man who would break the cycle of petty wars and unite the living. When the chamber doors finally swung open to let in the cold night air, Jon gazed out into the swirling snow and thought of the White Walkers, relentless in the far north. No crown or council would stop them, only swords and fire and the combined might of a realm set aside from its feuds. He prayed he could be the hinge that pulled it all together before the great darkness fell. In that hush, Robb clasped Jon's arm, smiling through weary eyes. We did it, brother. The North stands with you. Jon nodded, a strange blend of gratitude and trepidation coursing through his veins. Yes, he said softly. One realm united, or we all die. Let's hope our next steps keep us moving toward life. And with that, he stepped forward, ready to meet the swirl of lords and alliances that would define the war to come, each footfall echoing in the halls of Winterfell, each moment carrying him closer to the final confrontation with ice and death, and the forging of a new age for Westeros.